My name is Chris, and this story happened about 2 years ago in September. I was 15 years old and had at the time started a new school. I was there for about 2 weeks and I had yet to make any friends. There was another new student that started. His name was Caleb. He was a bit socially awkward, but we started talking, hanging out together, and soon became friends. We both had something in common in being the new kids at school. I hung out with Caleb at school a few times during the weekends. The more time I spent with this dude, Caleb, the more uncomfortable I became around him. He would always speak about strange or depressing topics. He would ask me things like how I will kill somebody and get away with it. Every weird question he asked me, he would then tell me in great length and detail what he would do in that situation. It was like he thought about this stuff all the time. One weekend I went to Caleb's house for a sleepover. When I arrived at Caleb's house, he was home alone. Caleb never spoke about his mom, and he told me that his dad was always working late and he wouldn't see him until the morning time. So we ordered pizza, played video games, and watched movies until late at night. I remember looking at the time and I saw it was 2:40 a.m. I said I was tired and I told Caleb I wanted to go to sleep. So I went downstairs because I would be sleeping on a fold-out couch and Caleb would be sleeping in his room. It took some time for me to fall asleep because Caleb kept me awake by walking around upstairs and switching the lights on and off. I remember having an awful dream that I was drowning and I felt like I was about to die. I woke up in a panic and Caleb had his hands around my throat. He was shaking me. I sat up coughing and struggling to breathe. After I sat up, Caleb asked if I was alright and told me that he came downstairs to get a glass of water and saw it looked like I was having a nightmare, so he shook me to wake me up. I told Caleb I was fine and I thanked him for waking me up. Caleb went back upstairs. I was a bit shook up from what just happened, so I didn't fall asleep right away. I eventually calmed down and managed to get back to sleep after about an hour. When I woke up in the morning, I saw Caleb sitting on the couch on the other side of the room, staring at me. He said I should leave because his dad would be home soon. It was an odd way to end our sleepover, I remember thinking to myself. I thought about if Caleb's dad even knew I was even staying over. Either way, I didn't feel welcomed anymore, so I did what Caleb said and I left to go home. About 2 days later, someone on Facebook messaged me saying that they saw that I was friends with Caleb, and they told me that Caleb used to go to their school. He didn't warn me to stay away from him. He said Caleb was accused of killing another student at a sleepover, and the case went to court. Caleb was found not guilty due to a lack of motive and evidence, but the school Caleb was at didn't want him there anymore. I wasn't sure if I believed what that random person had told me about Caleb, but I did think about the recent sleepover I had. I thought about if Caleb really was trying to wake me up from a nightmare, or was he trying to kill me in my sleep? Caleb did make me feel uncomfortable at times, but after being told he was accused of killing another student, it kinda made me afraid of him. I decided not to spend so much time with Caleb after that, and only hung out with him in school. About 2 months later, he moved away, and I eventually lost contact with him, until a few years later. I saw something on Facebook about a murder in another town. I saw Caleb's picture and I read about what happened. Caleb managed to get a girlfriend, and one day he went to her house to spend time with her while she was babysitting her brother. While Caleb was there, his girlfriend fell asleep as he played video games with her younger brother. She woke up to a woman screaming. That woman was her mother. Caleb's girlfriend went downstairs, saw her mother on her knees screaming. She then looked over at the game area where her brother and Caleb were. At least she thought Caleb was there. What she saw was horrifying. Her brother was laying on his back. Blood was everywhere. But that wasn't the worst of it. His head was missing and Caleb wasn't anywhere to be found. They immediately called the cops, and Caleb was actually caught roaming the streets with blood all over him, including his mouth. Caleb confessed to killing the little boy, but he also confessed to eating parts of him. One thing that they never found was his head. Caleb doesn't remember. Well, at least that's what he told the police. My name is Corey, and growing up I had a best friend whose name was Joshua. I used to have sleepovers at Joshua's house quite often, and in the warmer months, we would have campouts out in his back garden. What was nice was behind Joshua's back garden was a huge forest where we spent a lot of time exploring and playing. It was Friday and I was with Joshua at his house. His mom said dinner wouldn't be ready for another 45 minutes, so he suggested that we went outside and played with Joshua's new walkie-talkies. So that's what we did until dinner was ready. Later that night, we were in Joshua's treehouse playing board games. His parents had already said goodnight to us. As we were playing board games, I heard a crackling static noise. I asked Joshua what that noise was, and he said it's just a walkie-talkie. He said it's probably Doug. I asked, who the hell is Doug? Joshua told me it was this guy that he met out in the woods, and he seemed really cool. Joshua had given him a walkie-talkie, and they speak sometimes at night. I asked Joshua if Doug went to our school. He said he didn't think Doug even went to school. Joshua turned up the walkie-talkie and replied to Doug. Now, when I first heard Doug's voice, he didn't sound like no kid. He did not sound our age at all. Doug asked if Joshua wanted to go with him to check out his gaming room. I asked Joshua what he meant by gaming room. He told me that Doug keeps asking him to go to his house with him. Joshua told me that Doug doesn't really take no for an answer and usually has to just turn off the walkie-talkie. He replied back to Doug saying he can't go with him because he's in his treehouse and was about to go to sleep. Joshua then turned off the walkie-talkie. We spent the rest of the night trading Yu-Gi-Oh cards, playing games before we went to sleep. I don't know why, but I woke up in the middle of the night. I saw a light shining in the treehouse. I thought Joshua was awake reading comics, but when I looked at him, he was asleep. The light was coming from outside. I looked out the window of the treehouse, and I saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest shining a flashlight up in the treehouse. They switched it off when they noticed me, pulled up their pants from around their ankles, and ran back in the forest. I woke Joshua up and I told him someone was outside watching us. Joshua suggested that we go inside the house, and I agreed. The next morning, we told Joshua's parents that we slept inside the house because I saw someone in the forest. Joshua never told his parents about Doug, and I don't think he had to because Joshua told me he never heard anything else from Doug again after that night. Joshua and I both think that Doug was in the forest watching the treehouse that night. We both thought of many different theories of what he was planning to do, and honestly, none of those were actually good. I'm glad he never came up there. I'm Brian. Recently, someone asked me if I believed in the paranormal, or if I've had an experience that I felt was paranormal. I replied saying that I'm not sure if I believed in paranormal or not, but I did have a creepy experience. When I was 9 years old, I had a best friend who lived across the street from me, whose name was Maddie. On Fridays and Saturdays, Maddie and I had this plan where we would stay awake past 11 p.m. That was the time both our parents would usually be asleep. We would look out of each other's windows, and we'll use binoculars and flashlights, and we would shine a light to each other's bedroom window, and that would let us know that we're getting on the PlayStation 3 that night, while our parents were sleeping. If neither of us shined a light by 11:30 p.m., that meant we weren't playing the PlayStation that night. It was a Friday night, and I stayed up until around 11:30, and I didn't get a response from Maddie's flashlight. I wasn't really tired, and I had already switched on my PS3. So I thought I would play for a little bit. As I was on the PlayStation, I noticed Maddie had came online. I sent him a message asking him why he didn't respond with his flashlight. Maddie didn't reply. I got up and I shined my flashlight into his room again. I still didn't get a response. I went back on my PS3 and I saw Maddie had replied. The message just said, "Hello." This didn't seem like Maddie at all. I replied back asking if he wanted to play. Maddie replied saying, "Look at my window." I got my binos up and my flashlight and I looked carefully through Maddie's bedroom window. I felt a cold chill when I saw a black tall figure standing in Maddie's window watching me. I didn't know what was going on. If this was a joke, or was he just trying to frighten me? I didn't want to talk to Maddie anymore that night, or play the PS3, so I switched everything off and I tried to go to sleep. I found it difficult to fall asleep that night. I kept feeling like If I looked out my window, I would see that figure watching me again. The following Sunday, Maddie called me and asked if I wanted to come outside and play. When I was outside, I asked what was going on with him the previous Friday and if he was playing a joke on me with that tall figure. Maddie looked at me confused and asked what I was talking about. I explained to him what happened and what I saw. He said that he didn't know what I was talking about, as he and his parents were away for the past 2 days, and they just got back that morning. I showed Maddie the messages I received from his account that night. After reading the messages, he looked like he believed me. Maddie then told me that sometimes in the night, his PS3 will turn on and off by itself. And there's been times where he was sure that he turned off his PS3 before leaving the house, and when he returned, it was back on again. I don't know if what I saw was paranormal, but it still remains the scariest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Each year, me and one of my closest friends, who we'll call Dane, go down to visit his grandparents at their cabin in a nice, small, peaceful town in the North Georgia mountains. Me, my friend, and his grandpa are all outdoors kind of guys, so we're always looking for something fun for all of us to do around the area. One night, we decided to go on a night hike on a trail not too far from the cabin. Now, this isn't your kind of trail you're probably thinking of. It really is a gravel dirt road, but a lot of hunters, campers, motorbikers, and backpackers use it. We headed out to the trail, and right as we pulled up to the trail, we noticed that an older, beat-up, suspicious-looking black Chevy SUV with 2 middle-aged men in it parked next to the entrance of the trail. Now, even though this is a safe area, drug deals and other kinds of sketchy activity can occur deep in these woods. So we avoided going on that trail, and we decided to head down to another trail about a half a mile down the road. We pulled about 50 or so feet into a trail that was just outside of view from the road. We parked the truck, got out, and started our hike. Our hike was off to a great start until we got a mile in, when we started to hear a dog bark from probably about 300 feet away. We decided to keep going, but the dog just would not stop barking. And we didn't know if the dog was on a leash or not and could come attack us, so we decided to turn around and we headed back. When we were about 1,000 feet away from the truck, we could see a car sitting behind my friend's grandpa's truck running with the headlights on. This instantly made us worried because who would just roll up behind a random truck at 10 at night on an isolated trail? Keep in mind, you would have had to drive on the trail to see where we parked the truck. It was not visible from the road. We stood there for about 5 minutes trying to see if we could see anybody, but since it was so dark and pretty far away, it was hard to see anything. Fortunately for us, there was a pretty large tree next to the trail we were able to stand behind, so there was no way these guys could see us from where they were at. My friend's grandpa took these night vision binoculars out and get a better look, but it was still not much help. We decided just to stand there and wait for them to turn around and leave because there was no chance that we were about to go back and walk next to a random car with potential bad people in it sitting behind our truck. After about 10 minutes of just standing there, to my absolute horror, the car drives around the truck and it starts to head down the trail in our direction. As fast as we could, we climbed up this hill right next to us and hid behind a log that was sitting up on top. A few seconds later, the same beat-up black Chevy SUV we saw outside the other trail we were originally supposed to hike on comes driving down, and it went right by where we were 15 seconds ago. The car had its windows rolled down and started to slow down as it drove past us. Me, my friend, and his grandpa were terrified, and our hearts were pounding out of our chests. And we were scared these guys would stop and sit there, or even worse, get out and start looking for us. Fortunately, the car just kept driving and never stopped. As soon as the car was out of sight, we got out of our hiding spot, booked it back to the truck, and got the hell out of there. I know this may not be as scary as some others, but it was definitely pretty frightening for us. We don't know who those guys were and what they wanted. My guess is they had a stash of something deep in that trail and they thought that we found it. And I guess they were looking for us, but we don't know what for. A lot of things could have gone wrong. We could have walked up to that truck just as it pulled in. And what if they got out and looked for us? What if they slashed the tires on the truck? Or what if they turned their headlights off and just sat there waiting for us to come back? My friend and his grandpa actually went back in the daytime a few days later to that exact spot where we were hiding and took some pictures. The first picture is where we were standing, looking at the truck and the car behind it. Off in the distance, you can see our truck parked. That's exactly where we had it. Just off to the left is a hill that we rushed up from the car. The second picture, you can see where our hiding spot was. After my friend and his grandpa went back, they said we were very lucky to have made it. Honestly, we were very lucky to make it up there successfully because it seemed impossible to do it as fast as we did, especially with all the shrubs and thorns in the way. If we got up there just maybe 2 seconds later, we would have been seen. And I can only imagine what could have happened if we didn't make it up that hill and if those guys saw us. Right now, I'm an 18-year-old female. This event occurred when I was 11 or 12 years old. I still remember the day, December 1st. This is what led to my parents and I to have to get an alarm installed. One day, my dad and I were home. I was in the living room watching Drake and Josh's Christmas special. Yeah, I remember exactly what I was watching. My dad was in the shower. It was just a regular casual afternoon until the doorbell rang. I paused the movie because, for me personally, we always lower the volume or pause the film when we have an unexpected guest. I was taught well enough to not open a door for anybody. If it was someone I knew that my parents told in advance, I would have opened the door, but this day, it was an unexpected guest. After I paused the movie, I ran to my room to look out the window to see who was at the door. My bedroom window is literally right next to the front door, so I can easily see who's there. But at the same time, it's easy enough to get caught. So I slightly pulled down the blinds, not giving away my position, and saw 2 black women standing there. After seeing them, I shrugged it off. I was thinking maybe they're promoting or selling something. I walked back to the couch and I waited a few more minutes. While I continued to watch the movie for the next few minutes, my heart dropped at what I saw at the back door. It was the 2 women, just standing there. I sat there frozen and unaware of what to do. Thankfully, my dad just finished showering and was entering the living room at the same time. He yelled, "Hey!" before running after them. Of course, they ran off, but my dad tried his best to capture the 2 women, but he couldn't catch them. A few seconds later, I heard tires screeching, which I assumed was their car. I wasn't entirely sure if it was just the 2 of them alone or if they had someone else in the car waiting for them. Whatever the case may be, we didn't encounter them again. I had no idea what their intentions were in the first place. Were they there to potentially rob us, kill us? Probably not, because I didn't see anything. No weapon, nothing. Anyways, I'm just glad that my dad and I are safe, as well as the household. We told my mom when she got home from work later that night. About a week or 2 later, we had an alarm system installed. The question still roams around my head when I think about this event is, why? Why us? Anyways, I'm glad that all of it was over. And wherever they are, I hope they didn't continue their actions and change their behavior for the better. A week ago, me and my little brother were walking our French bulldog Buster around our block to our mailbox. We live in a suburban neighborhood, so all of the mailboxes are located at a certain area, depending on what street you live on. We also just moved here about a month ago, and our community is brand new, so there are still some houses that are being built, and there's also empty lots here and there. But anyways, let's get to the story. My dad told us to walk our dog, and we went to go get our mail. As we were on our way back, a girl looked to be my age, which I'm a freshman in high school, and 14. She stormed out of her house and came out running and screaming, telling someone named Johnny to stop and leave her alone. She slammed the door and was holding a baby and running to another house. I thought she was playing around, but she was screaming bloody murder. Me and my brother kept looking over our shoulders because it was very off. When we reached our house, we informed our parents about it, and a few minutes later my dad, he came out saying that the cops are here. I immediately knew something went wrong over there. Also, before the cops came, A guy was running to a red Toyota Tacoma and sped out of there before the cops came. Then the fire department came, and so did 2 ambulances. I knew something severe had to happen because I'd say around 7 to 10 cops showed up to the house. Later in the week, we got a knock on our door. I was home alone with my brother. I looked through the peephole and I saw a man dressed as a detective at our front porch. I opened the door, and he asked if I was or anyone else near the house that I had previously mentioned. I told him everything that me and my brother witnessed. Then he told me something that shook me. He said that there had been a report of domestic violence in that house where we saw the girl screaming, holding the baby. She actually was the daughter of an alcoholic. The daughter's mother got into an argument with the father. The daughter and the baby had somehow got involved, which led to the monster hitting both of them. The reason why there were so many cops was due to the fact that the father drove off and he was claimed to be armed. A day later, the police discovered that he had took his own life at a power substation near us. The detective said that he was in the red Toyota Tacoma when he took his own life. Then I realized that was the same man that I saw sprinting to that red Toyota Tacoma. I'm still shocked about this because somebody took their life that I actually saw right before it happened. I hope that girl and that baby are okay because I haven't heard anything about them since.
My stalker ended up being the one person in my life that I thought would never do me any harm. My husband of 7 years. And let me tell you, he made my life absolute torture. I'm going to show you my age a little here by saying that at the time this all occurred, what we might call stalker laws these days just didn't exist in the same way. There wasn't the same sort of access to restraining orders. Women's shelters weren't nearly as common or well-funded as they are now. It wasn't a great time to be a divorcee, and if it wasn't for the fact that I was a state employee, I think I would have just been left to deal with it on my own. In the state this took place, it's a serious offense to harass an employee of the state government, so I basically ended up with state troopers as bodyguards for a while. They were wonderful, and I honestly owe them a lot. They would walk me to and from my car. They would come into the office to check on me at least once a day. The only thing was, they couldn't follow me home. The place I'd be alone with 2 young children who didn't understand why their daddy was so angry. This all started when my ex filed for a divorce. We'd already been separated for a while by the time the papers came, and honestly, I totally checked out of the marriage. It was dysfunctional and abusive, and apart from my children, who I love more than anything in the world, I had wasted 7 years of my life with a violent narcissist who I believe took pleasure in my misery. It was typically pig-headed of him to assume I'd contest the divorce, that I'd be unable to fend for myself, and that somehow I'd want him back. But I didn't. I just signed those papers on the dotted line and mailed them back to the courthouse. If he'd bothered to pay any attention to my life before he'd separated, he'd have known I'd gotten 2 serious promotions in 6 months. One earned and one an opportunity, and I was making only a few grand less than him per year. I didn't want child support or alimony. I just wanted him out of my life. When he found out I wasn't contesting the divorce, that was when everything went to chaos. His pathetic little attempt to intimidate me hadn't worked, and because he couldn't control me anymore, he turned rabid. He would call me at least 30, sometimes 40 times a day, to hiss threats of violence down the line at me. He even called me at work. Then, when I had his number screened, he started calling my boss and lying about my behavior in an attempt to get me fired. He called my coworkers and harassed them. On more than one occasion, he came to my office and was caught letting the air out of my tires or keying my car door. He called my family to threaten them as well, then tried to turn my children against me by playing the victim whenever he had custody. Things just got worse and worse and worse. He had my check garnished by telling the county's office that he was the custodial parent, which was a complete lie. Then, without even bothering to check with me or their school records, they just started deducting half my paycheck for child support. I had to take an entire day off of work that I definitely couldn't afford and drive many miles to straighten out this freaking mess that he'd caused. He also called my pastor to cry on his shoulder after making up a bunch of absolute nonsense about me. He was looking for allies. He was looking to alienate me from all those I cared about, and for a while, it actually kind of worked. It was utterly humiliating, and for a while I couldn't get any more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night, and that's if sleep came at all. The final straw came when he broke into my house one night and tortured me for 6 hours, all the while his own 2 children were screaming and crying in the next room. My whole face was so swollen that I was barely recognizable, and after he beat me half to death, he turned out to be so drunk that he actually fell asleep on what had been our marriage bed for 7 long years. Once he passed out, I silently slipped out of bed, then crept downstairs to call the police. He woke up to the sight of a cop spraying mace in his eyes, and God did it feel good to hear him scream. Once they hauled him off to jail on assault charges, the cops took pictures of my face to use as evidence against him in court, and for the first time in a long time, I actually felt safe. He went to jail that night, but nothing stopped him from bailing out just a few days later. Luckily, the cops were nice enough to call me to let me know that he was out, but I was still anxious because he'd left his car at my house, which obviously meant he had to come back to get it. I stayed up all night waiting for him to come and get his car. I didn't want to sleep because I didn't know what he would do next. There was every chance that he'd come at night just to mess with me. He finally came walking up at 1:30 a.m., but instead of starting some kind of confrontation, I honestly never saw him move so fast. He wanted to get out of there quickly, and it was clear he hadn't forgotten how terrible it was to get arrested. Finally, it seemed like his manic, violent behavior was starting to subside. The calls and threats kept coming for months, even though I had a restraining order. And on the advice of my lawyer, I began taping them. This is probably the number one thing that ended up making a difference, so ladies, please, get into the habit of taping phone calls and screenshotting anything from your stalkers. Small digital recorders are fairly cheap these days, and they're just as important as mace or tasers in these situations. Even if mine was a long time ago, I'm glad I had something to record it with. Next, he started driving by my house, and it got so bad that I went to stay with my mom because I was just so frightened and exhausted. I was just about to close her front door when I saw his van drive by, and that accounts for one of the few times where I actually became hysterical. Like I said, I was just worn out, emotionally and physically. I called 911 and told them that my stalker was threatening myself and my elderly mother, but only minutes before they showed up, he left, almost like he had a police scanner in his car or something. I went to stay with a friend that night, and you can bet your butt I took my mom with me. I didn't want him to see my car there and break into the house and hurt my mom. She's a frail widow, and the fact that he might have targeted her too was what hit me so hard. It really felt like no one was safe. One night I went to an outdoor music show with an old friend of mine. She told me that I needed the stress release, and she was dead right about that. And on top of that, it was a family concert, so I could have the kids with me. The way I saw it, if the kids were with me, they were safe as possible. Then just as I was getting relaxed, I looked up and saw his van coming around the corner, and at the same time, I realized I couldn't see my kids. I can barely describe the kind of terror that gripped me in that moment. I spun around on the spot and saw that there were a bunch of kids playing in the grass nearby. I spotted my young son, but my 8-year-old daughter was nowhere to be seen. Naturally, I started calling her name as loud as I could, walking towards where the van was parked to make sure it wasn't my husband. That's when I saw him, drunk again. My daughter came running when she heard his voice, and she was just about to climb into the passenger seat when I caught her. She had no idea how trashed he was, and I think it says a lot that she was used to seeing him like that, how seeing him all red-eyed and slurring his words was like a normal thing for her by that point. I ran to the nearest phone booth, this was way before cell phones, to tell the cops that my ex-husband had just tried to kidnap his own children. I didn't realize how badly I was screaming into the phone because when I looked around, almost everybody at the concert was staring at me. The cops put an APB out on his van, but my nerves were fried, and that night was yet another that came and went without sleep. The next morning, my heroes, the state police, called me to tell me his van was now at his house. I jumped in my car and drove the 60 miles in half the normal time. When I got there, they had his house surrounded. A guy with a bullhorn was saying how they knew he was there because he answered the phone. I had no idea what was going on, but when I asked them and they identified, all they were interested in asking me is if he had a gun. I told them I wasn't sure. He never had one when we lived together, but then again, a lot of things had changed since we were living together. We sat there for like an hour, and no matter how many times the cops called his phone, he just wouldn't pick it up. Finally, the front door opens and a whole bunch of cops are screaming at him to put his hands up as he walked out. The whole time he was just hungover and feeling uncooperative, where, as we were all thinking we might just come out shooting. He gets taken right back to jail, then I drive home again, just emotionally frazzled. He ended up taking a plea bargain and just got probation, but I think the second encounter with the cops actually tipped things over the edge for him. The way he was going, he was either going to end up dead or in jail, and I think that finally got through his thick skull because after that, the harassment started to peter out until at last, I had peace again. Moving me and my kids out of state sure helped, but to my knowledge, he's made no attempt to follow us at all. I'm sorry this comment ended up being so long. I just saw the post and I knew that I had one heck of a story to contribute. Hopefully women and girls can read this and learn a thing or two from my experience and my mistakes so the same thing doesn't happen to them. Because honestly, I wouldn't wish that kind of thing on my worst enemy.
So this happened when I was in elementary school, and it was around 4th or 5th grade. I was really excited for the day because, of course, it was hat day, which is when you bring $1 and give it to the teacher and you can wear your hat for the day. So the day went pretty normal. Went to breakfast, had specials, went to class, etc. All that fun stuff. Now the best time of the day came around. Lunch. So I was really excited because we go to recess after lunch, but I was also super hungry. So anyways, I get in line, get my food, pay, and sit down with some of my friends. Probably about 20 minutes or so goes by, and I was done with my food and kind of just sitting there chatting with my friends. Well, another 10 minutes go by, and I'm starting to get a little worried because we're staying a little longer there than usual, so I decide to get up to ask a teacher what's going on. The teacher just said she's sorry, and she doesn't really know herself. Another 3 minutes go by, and the principal comes down and tells all the teachers to shut the cafeteria doors. Everyone's kind of freaking out a bit, but not a lot. They're just kind of confused on what's happening. The principal then comes in the cafeteria and then says,
"Listen everyone, pay attention. We're going on a soft lockdown, so please everyone stay in your seats and do not get up. Nobody is to be let out into the halls."
And then she left. Around 20 more minutes go by, and everyone is still a little freaked out. Some people are even starting to cry. So I'm basically talking with friends and chatting with people around me, trying to keep my mind off of what's happening, when the teachers then start to close the blinds on all the windows. The intercom starts up again, and then says,
"Look everyone, we're going on a hard lockdown. Stay where you are."
Everyone is totally freaking out now. An hour goes by, and now half of the people are crying. I'm being a little dramatic bitch, and I basically start writing on a paper about if I don't make it out alive, I love you type things. And so I'm literally having like a mental breakdown while half of the place is crying. I decide to get up and ask the teacher what's going on, and what she then told me absolutely sent chills down my spine. There's people who are saying they're going to start a school shooting. They're protesting outside the school, and police are outside as well. I literally just froze. I run back over to my seat and then tell all the people around me what's happening, and just start hugging everyone, thinking this might be the last time that I'm ever going to see them or my parents again. After what feels like 100 hours, probably just one more hour in reality, and the intercom comes back on. They're saying that we're now on a soft lockdown again. I'm still crying my eyes out and hugging my friends. Another 40 minutes pass, and the lockdown is now finally over. We survived. Everyone is still kinda crying, but they're a bit more happy and stuff. So it takes us about 20 minutes to get out of the cafeteria. We eventually get out, and everyone's moms and dads are there to pick them up. I'm going into the classroom, just trying to think what the hell happened. After about 30 or 40 minutes of waiting while crying, my mom finally shows up. I hugged her the tightest that I've ever hugged anyone in my life, and then went home. I was telling my mom what happened all the way home. I even later heard that they were apparently going to come back on Wednesday and then shoot up the school then. Well, as you can imagine, I didn't go to school that Wednesday. Yet nothing ever happened. I was still absolutely traumatized from this event. If you're the person that almost did this to us, I truly hope that we never meet. I really hope you burn in hell for traumatizing a 10-year-old girl who just wanted to wear a hat that day. You sick, awful fuck. In 2017, in my last semester of high school, some friends and I decided to skip the pep rally for the girls' varsity basketball team making the playoffs for the first time. My last period of the day was theater tech. I was really just taking it as a fine arts credit, and 2 of my friends in the grade below me were in that class with me. We decided to skip the pep rally, leave school early, and go to the nearby Taco Bell like we did every day. However, administrators and security guards patrolled the parking lots to catch kids trying to skip, so we took a detour instead through the nature trail on campus in order to avoid them. Once in the nature trail, we'd came across this kid that I hadn't seen before. He was a skinny white kid with shaggy black hair, wearing baggy jeans and a plain white t-shirt. He was shorter than me, but the most notable thing about him was his general look of dishevelment. His hair was really wild and full of leaves and twigs. His plain white t-shirt was dirty, and the knees of his jeans were stained green and brown. He actually seemed like he had been crawling around in the nature trail. I remember wondering for a split second if maybe he lived there. When we came upon him, we were walking in one direction parallel to the school and to the back of the parking lot, and he was coming directly toward us. I knew the nature trail well enough to know that there was a bend that led deep into the woods, and I figured he had come from there. He was out of breath, and he looked scared. My 2 friends said hi to him. My friends were in the grade below me, and later told me that the kid was in their grade and was just acquaintances with my 2 friends. It was really just supposed to be a quick hello, but I couldn't help but notice how scared he looked and how suspicious he seemed of us. He asked us what we were doing in the woods, and we told him we were skipping the pep rally. One of my friends then asked, "What have you been doing out here? Camping?" Me and my other friend kinda gave a nervous laugh, but the kid didn't even crack a smile. He explained that he was dropped off at school that morning, and he was supposed to get on a bus to take him to DAEP. Now, DAEP was the alternative school that kids who got suspended from school had to go to. Now his plain outfit started to make sense now. It was the infamous uniform of that alternative school. He then explained that he didn't want to go to the alternative school, so when his mom dropped him off, he pretended like he would wait for the bus and then hid in the nature trail for the full 8 hours of the school day. He was still acting really skittish, and without even looking at each other or speaking to each other, my friends and I could just feel that something definitely wasn't right, and that we were in some kind of danger. The kid looked around nervously often, as if someone might have followed us, or if we were alone in the woods. We hit him with a, "Alright man, well good luck. We're gonna try to get to our cars and go home before the pep rally ends." When he heard the word cars, he perked up. He started slowly walking with us towards the parking lot, continuing to talk. He becomes a lot more friendly now, and asks if we can give him a ride home. We give him some half-baked excuse why we couldn't, but he doesn't really take no for an answer. He tells us that people are going to start looking for him pretty soon, and that he was going to be in a lot of trouble if he doesn't get out of there. We tell him that he'd probably be fine hiding there deep in the nature trail, but he then just tells us, "Nah man, you don't understand. I broke into a car at the Fellowship." He pointed in the direction of the mega church that had a parking lot backed up to my school, then saying, "I took this." From his waistband, he then pulled out a handgun, and I felt sick to my stomach. I had never seen a real gun like that in real life. At this point, I really felt like I was in danger. Not just because he had produced a gun. I had never really been scared of them. More so that the entire interaction just felt really uneasy, and that the guy was already unsettling and desperate to begin with. One of my friends then very cautiously tells him that he should probably just ditch it and take off somewhere, and he just stood there staring at us for a really uncomfortable amount of time, his eyes meeting each of ours. I broke the silence by saying that we wouldn't tell anyone, but that we really had to go before the pep rally ended. And then my other stupid ass friend, who had been virtually silent the entire time, then spoke up and said, "Yeah, and it's really best we're not around if they start looking for you for that," pointing to the handgun. His eyes narrowed once more, and he asked if one of us could take him home. This time, however, it felt more like a command. I've never really been a super brave person, but in that moment, I don't know why, I just blurted out, "Nah man, I'm good." And again, there was a really uncomfortable silence. Then he asked, "Before you leave, do you guys want to see something?" My first friend was kind of a hothead, and although he was really uncomfortable with the situation, he wasn't afraid of conflict, nor was I. My other friend, however, wasn't a fan of conflict, and would almost always de-escalate first. We all looked at each other, and me and my first friend kind of had an unspoken understanding, like if this was really going to happen, or if we were going to have to run or fight. My other friend was very visibly afraid. He asked, "What is it that you want to show us?" And before the kid could answer, my first friend then said, "We don't want to see it. We have to go." My first friend started briskly walking past the kid, and me and my other friend quickly followed. Within a few steps, we just started sprinting towards the parking lot. I decided to look back once we were about 50 steps away. As I looked back, he was still just standing there, watching us run. He put the gun back in his waistband before taking a small adjacent trail back deeper into the woods. By the time we made it to the parking lot, there were police everywhere. We were sweating out of breath and absolutely terrified from everything that happened. They ended up finding the kid within the next 10 minutes. Somehow in the chaos, nobody saw us exit the nature trail and into the parking lot. But since there were so many cops in the parking lot, we decided to just head back inside through another side door, only to find out that the door was locked. That's when an administrator had found us, brought us inside, and then shoved us into a classroom where we were able to talk with the others and find out what was going on. This is what we could piece together from what we learned. Turns out that the kid had skipped DAEP, hid in the nature trail, broke into a car at the church, and then stole a semi-automatic shotgun and handgun from the car. After stealing the guns, he texted his girlfriend and he told her he was about to do something really terrible, and that whenever she saw his name on the news, she should turn off the TV. He told her explicitly that he was going to kill all the kids at school. She knew that he was supposed to be in DAEP, and she was so worried about the text that she contacted the police. DAEP went on lockdown until officers got a call from a guy at church that had 2 guns that had been stolen from his car behind the school, and that's when they put 2 and 2 together and caught him hiding in the woods. I guess when he saw me and my 2 friends in the nature trail, he quickly hid the shotgun, but just didn't have enough time to hide the pistol. That or he just didn't care enough to hide. Whatever the case, I'm just really glad me and my friends got out alive that day. Who the fuck really knows what could have happened if we actually gave them a ride or stayed behind with them. I'm 15 years old and currently in the 10th grade. Last year I was acting for one of my school's productions as I go to this really artsy school in my city, so the turnout was pretty good. I had played a really small part who basically explains the plot. Anyhow, after I was done with the scene, me and a couple of the other actors had decided to go backstage. Behind our stage was this hallway. Most of the actors would just chill and wait for their scenes there. At the end of the said hallway was a door that would lead outside. I was chatting with a friend of mine when there was a knock at the door. We all froze. One of the seniors named Jay had asked what it was. We all started to stare out of the window of the door into the pitch black. I began to walk towards the door with Jay right behind me, then telling me to let him go out. I didn't really know what to do at that point. I guess I just really wanted to impress the other actors. I opened the door and looked upon the field. A really cool breeze then hit me in the face. There was another actor there named Kai that stood behind me as I looked around the door. I couldn't see anyone though, so I shut the door. All of the other actors were scolding me for opening the door. Anyhow, right after the end of the night after the show had finished, I was waiting in the almost empty staff and student parking lot right outside for my mom to pick me up. I was listening to some music and looking around when I then saw something move right in the field. I turned my head to try and get a closer look of it, and I could have sworn that I saw two people hiding right under a tree. One was holding what had looked like a baseball bat, while the other just stood next to him. Once they had spotted me, I then yelled, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" They both then turned and then began to run towards me. I began to bang on the doors and was constantly looking right over my shoulder at the two of them. Luckily for me, one of the other actors had quickly opened the door, and I then ran inside and told her to shut it. She did, and then she began to ask me what was wrong, and I swear I could feel my stomach drop. Right at that moment, there was a loud bang on the door. We could now see that it was two fully grown men who appeared to be in their 30s. One was hitting the door with a metal baseball bat, and the other was holding what looked to be a steak knife. Luckily, the actress, who I'll refer to as Taylor, began to dial 911 and then yelled that she was calling the cops. They had immediately bolted. When the cops arrived, they had searched under the tree. As it turns out, they had apparently been there since the start of the play, based on the cigarettes and a pamphlet about the play that was found under it. What was shocking was that my name, along with two of my fellow actors, the main characters, were circled. It seemed like when they knocked on the door, they were hoping it was just one of those actors. I guess they thought we'd be an easy target or something. I don't know. I'm really grateful for Jay being behind me when I had opened the door. And please, whatever you do, always have someone nearby. You just don't know what's out there lurking in the darkness, just waiting for you. Be careful. I typically don't really like attention, yet since freshman year I've got nothing but admirers. It wasn't quite the dream though. I tend to attract guys that I find, for lack of a better word, gross and dumb. They have no idea about boundaries or hygiene. The people who I did like seem to never feel the same. This one boy really stands out like a sore thumb because I had once told this story in a YouTube video. However, I was urged to delete it because of some of the information I said. This started when I was around 14 to early 15 years old. For some quick context, I'm autistic and I use a classroom called BMC. The classroom was made for kids who needed help with emotional issues, such as anger or depression. Now, I only ever went to this classroom when I needed a break from all of the kids in the hectic classrooms, or whenever I was agitated. I never really talked to anyone in the classroom other than the staff. There were always at least 2 or 3 teachers in there to make sure none of these kids went too crazy. Some were really chill, but a lot of them were really crazy and hyper. I, most of the time, just listened to music while working. Because of this, I was shut off from the craziness and kind of just in my own little world. One day though, one of these kids who we'll call Jack came out to my spot on the bus stop. I ride the special need bus because the regular ones are typically just a little too crazy or crowded for me. But the bus that I usually rode parked at the furthest end of the bus loop. So I normally just wait by the trees nearby while listening to music and singing. That's when who we'll call Jack then came up to me. I was kind of surprised. He said that he had a crush on me despite us never even talking prior to this point. That was one warning sign I ignored. The second was that he asked if I wanted to go to prom with him. He was a senior. What made it even worse was that when my bus finally showed, I gave him my number and told him bye. What he said back to me, well, made me want to vomit. He then said with no hesitations whatsoever,
"I love you."
I'm not kidding. The literal minute that I sit down on the bus, he then starts spamming me with texts. At one point I even muted his texts and they'd still blow up my phone. Eventually I told my parents and the BMC manager what he was doing to me. They told me that he was 18 and that what he was doing could be considered illegal. I immediately blocked him on every single platform I owned. I really thought that would be the end of it, but sadly not. He would occasionally try and talk to me yet again. At first, I tried to be nice about rejecting him, but by the 3rd or 4th time, I just grew sick of it. I told him that if he kept it up, I was going to tell my parents and they would go to the police. He finally left me alone for a long time after that. This entire experience really taught me to trust my gut because he was literally trying to date a 14-year-old girl. I really hope that this tells you that no matter what, it's always okay to listen to your gut. Otherwise, you could end up in a very scary or really uncomfortable scenario. When I was about 5 years old, my school was doing the stranger danger talk with all of the students. Things like don't talk to strangers, if a car follows you, walk further back on the sidewalk and then walk the opposite way where the car is facing, and how to get someone's turn signal to go off if you're in their trunk. Things like that. After school, I usually went to after-school care. That is, unless my mom was going to be working late. In that case, then my grandparents would pick me up. This happened pretty often since my mom was a single badass mom of 3 who worked full-time as a charge nurse and was also battling cancer. I never really minded going to my grandparents' house so much, especially since they really spoiled me rotten. I had one of those Razor scooters that I would always ride up and down their driveway, as well as my uncle's because he lived next door. One day while I was playing in the backyard, I had then heard the sound of my grandpa's truck leaving the driveway. I got really excited because I knew that I could now ride my scooter in the driveway. Normally I would go inside and tell my grandma because she would keep the front door open to keep an eye out on me. But I didn't want to waste any time since I didn't know when my grandpa would be back. I had quickly ran out of the gate right to the front yard, grabbed my scooter, and then started riding back and forth between my grandparents' and uncle's driveway. A few minutes later, I had noticed a man at the end of the block. He had slowly started walking towards the house. The only reason he caught my attention as odd is because it was September in Texas, and it was really hot. I was wearing capris and a short-sleeved shirt, while the man had long pants and also a jacket on with the hood up. His hands were in his pockets and his head was down. Thinking back to what we had been talking about at school, I'd started to get really nervous, but made another round to both driveways. The man had started walking faster now. I tried to justify it by thinking that maybe he'd been friends with my uncle or something. I mean, that really could have been a possibility. This time, I had only went up and down my grandparents' driveway, not my uncle's. The man was at the end of my uncle's driveway and started cutting across the grass heading directly for me. I threw my scooter to the ground and ran for the backyard. Once I was in the backyard, I grabbed my dog and ran in the house, because I guess in my 5-year-old mind, I was worried that my dog would get stolen by this man. Once I got inside, I had ran to my grandma who was sitting on the couch. I asked her to go check if there was a man outside. She looked out the window and she said yes, that he's walking the other way. I didn't tell her what happened in fear that I would get in trouble for not telling her I was out in the front yard in the first place. I'm so glad that our school talked to us about strangers, because I honestly don't know if I would have reacted the same way without their talk. It took me a couple of months to be comfortable playing outside again, even in the backyard. When I did make an attempt to play out in the front, I decided to stay hidden in between my grandparents' and uncle's homes. One day while I was building a fort, I had noticed a car that was passing by my grandparents' house. It then slammed its brakes right in front of their house. I looked over and I noticed about 2 men right in the front of the car pointing at me. I took off for the backyard and then heard the car then pull out. I don't really know if they had bad intentions or not, or maybe just wondering what I was doing. But that happening, along with the creepy man, was enough to terrify me into not playing outside for the next 2 years. For a 5-year-old kid, I was terrified.
My biggest mistake in high school was agreeing to take a AP physics class with the seniors. I was a rising sophomore at the time, so when I walked into a class with kids much older than I was, my teacher sat me next to the only other person there that was close to my age. He was a freshman and his name was Josh. Josh was one of those people who gave off weird vibes. He had a sloppily shaven head, empty eyes, and ate warm Skittles in class. He was short, but mean-looking, and the instant I sat down next to him, my teacher ordered us to exchange numbers and tried to make us start talking. For some reason, I really did not want to talk to him. I wasn't trying to be a a-hole, but he just scared me. Sitting next to him felt like what I can only describe as sitting next to a hungry dog while you're holding a piece of chicken. It felt like any second he would jump on me, even though he was a good 6 inches shorter than me. It really freaked me out that he had my phone number and name, even though I didn't know the kid. I had a feeling that him knowing literally anything about me was not good. Luckily, he didn't talk to me for over a week, and after some time, I thought I was just being over-judgmental, and he was just a socially awkward kid. One day, about 3 weeks later, after I started the class with him, he talked to me. He asked something like, "You're the girl that drives the F-150, right?" And reluctantly, I said, "Yeah." He then told me that cars were a hobby of his, and he had seen me driving and liked my truck. Although I was caught a bit off guard, he seemed innocent and nice, and we kind of became friends after that. He started texting me a lot after school, asking me a bit about myself and sharing a bit about himself too. Like I said, the kid seemed innocent, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I shouldn't be telling him anything about myself, and I should not be talking to him. The average conversation continued for a month or so, until one day, when I came home from work. I work at a restaurant about 20 minutes away from my house. So, when I turned my phone on to drive to work, I honestly wouldn't turn it back on. I honestly wouldn't turn it back on until I drove back home, as phones were prohibited at the restaurant. One week I came home at 12 after doing closing shift, and he had sent me several odd texts. They all consisted of, "I love you," and "I want to take you to homecoming," and "Be my girlfriend." They all rubbed me the wrong way. He didn't seem to really be asking as much as he was demanding me to have a relationship with him. That I wasn't comfortable with. I ultimately friend-zoned him and told him I was going to bed. His response was, "No. Just no." It freaked me the F out, and made me really not want to go to class on Monday. But I had no choice and I had to go. He didn't text me for the rest of the weekend, and when I sulked into class on Monday, he gave me the same hungry dog stare from day one, and I ignored him the whole class. I practically ran when the bell rang, and when I got to my car in the student parking lot, I saw him watch me drive away from the sidewalk. It freaked me out more than I'd like to admit, so I called one of my guy friends and asked him if I could drive him home from school so I'd feel safer until creepy Josh would be less creepy. He agreed and we made an arrangement there and then. A lot of people thought I was overacting, but I just knew in my gut that I needed someone in the car with me, and this guy friend seemed like the right one. When I came home from work at 10-ish Monday night, I opened my phone and saw more texts from Josh. This time they were much more predatory than the night before, as at night they were detailing how he would like me to perform sexual acts on him. I foolishly allowed this to happen for another couple of weeks, still feeling uncomfortable in class when it finally hit a breaking point. Josh started sending me texts about how if I didn't love him, he had to die. At that point, I decided it was time to involve Adine, but she did virtually nothing. She basically explained that Josh was special needs, and to cut him some slack. Despite the predatory tone of the messages, she told me she would talk to him about it, but not to worry, because he likely wouldn't do anything. I was infuriated and told my dad, who has his army of Italian brothers, who all decided to keep an eye on him. The creepy messages didn't get any worse, and eventually they stopped after I blocked his number. That was when the really creepy stuff started. The cameras outside our houses kept picking up a person at night, someone very similar looking to Josh. This person kept knocking on the windows and looking into my car, so my dad called the cops, who were actually awesome and kept a lookout on my house for a while to deter the nightly visits. With the cop outside at night, the visit stopped, and my work started getting calls from Josh asking when I was working. My manager ended up alerting security, who threatened him to stop calling. Then Josh decided to start frequenting the restaurant where I worked at every day, and leave paper cranes on the table saying, "I love you," with my name. And my new boyfriend's name isn't good for you. I am. He started following me to class, to my car, to work, even though I pretended he wasn't there. And I was still driving my 6'3" guy home friend with me. I refused to leave my house without a group of people, and debated skipping prom, and becoming a hermit because he made me feel so unsafe anywhere. Eventually my dad decided a restraining order would be a good idea, and I did get one granted, so he couldn't walk near me or contact me for 5 years. Thankfully, this finally caused the year-long nightmare to stop. I didn't see Josh again until my senior year, when I was walking down the hall with my friends. He saw me coming, stopped in his tracks, and slowly watched me walk past him with that same hungry dog look. That initially scared me the day I met him. You're probably wondering why he never got in any trouble when I contacted the dean and the police. Well, where I live, there's a bunch of laws that make it exponentially harder for someone with special needs to be punished for creepy behavior, even though they're just as capable to execute the behavior than the average person. The last time I saw Josh was on graduation, when I could have sworn he was the one in the front row waiting for me to get my diploma. Although it's possible he was there for someone else, a part of me knows he was there for me. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that this can happen to anyone. I never thought this would happen to me until it did, and it robbed me of my safety, high school experience, and peace of mind. Always trust your instincts in someone. You are not required to be nice to anyone who makes you uncomfortable. That led me to now. I'm happy. I'm in a serious relationship with an awesome guy. And in a weird way, I'm glad I was able to learn from this whole experience.
I was browsing Reddit this afternoon and came across this subreddit for the first time. Even though I'm a big coward when it comes to anything scary, this has to be the perfect place to share a terrifying incident that involved my cousins and myself about 15 years ago. At the time this happened, I was approaching my 16th birthday. My family had a big reunion every year in Southern California. Since I hadn't attended since I was little, my parents thought it would be a fun way to spend my summer break. It would also be a great opportunity to get to know my cousins. There was 3 of them, and they were all girls around my age. After I thought about it, it sounded fun, so I agreed and flew out the next month to Los Angeles. The reunion was held at the same hotel we were all staying in. When I arrived there, I was met by my cousins, Jennifer, Belinda, and Stormy. It was amazing how much alike we all looked. We all had long blonde hair and blue eyes, not to mention our facial similarities, but it made sense since our dads were brothers. The biggest difference was how tan they were. Since I had been inside all winter in Minnesota, they were much darker than me. My uncle and dad decided to let us stay in one room together. It was a big fancy bridal suite. When we saw the room, we came up with this joke that we were sisters and we were staying in the hotel together for my bachelorette party. I was chosen as the bachelorette because I was the oldest and looked a little different, like an older sister often does. We spent the rest of the day at the pool and talking to guys. Stormy, who was only 14, managed to trick a 25-year-old guy into thinking she was 19 and gave her his number. We were having so much fun, we stayed up until about 4 talking and laughing. In the morning, which was about noon for most of us, we ordered breakfast and then headed for the pool again. Our day turned out to be even more fun than the one before it. This time, Stormy got a pair of twins to buy her lunch. That girl was on fire that week. Later that evening, we all got dolled up and had dinner at the hotel's restaurant. But this time, the story we'd created had taken on a life of its own. My cousins had been telling guys all day that we were there to party and asking them to buy them drinks. But most of the men were wise enough to know that they were lying. After dinner, we joined this cute pair of older guys that were sitting in the lobby. When they noticed us leaving the restaurant, they had asked us to sit with them, and since we had nothing else to do, we did. Once we had sat down, they began asking us our ages and names. Of course, we lied and said we were in our early 20s, and they actually believed us. I couldn't help but giggle a bit. This was the most fun I'd had in years. Jennifer and I didn't say much. We left that to Belinda and Stormy. At one point, Stormy invited them up to our room, but I had to take her aside and remind her that her dad was staying in the room next to ours and would surely not like it. I didn't want to be a stick in the mud, but I wasn't comfortable with having two strange men who looked to be like 30 or something in our room. At the point it was approaching midnight, I told the two younger girls it was time to go back to our room, and they argued at first, but once Jennifer backed me up, they gave in. We told the guys to meet us at the pool around 11 a.m. and we get lunch together. Then we went back upstairs to our room. We stayed up talking about the two men and what we were planning on doing when we saw them. That lasted until about 2 a.m. when we decided to go to bed. The lights had just been turned off in the room when we all heard the doorknob start jiggling very fast, like somebody was trying to get in. At first, I thought it was my mind tricking me, but once it started again, I got scared. I asked the other girls if they were also hearing it, and they said yes. Without thinking, Belinda jumped up from her bed and said she would see who it was. I yelled out to her to stop her from opening the door, but it was too late. Jennifer got up and turned on the lights, and I joined her at the end of the hall. When Belinda opened the door, she turned to us and said no one was there, then turned back to the door and stepped out into the hall. That was when we saw a person in a black mask jump out and grab her. As soon as they grabbed her, she began screaming and fighting to get away. By this time, Stormy had joined Jennifer and I. All three of us were also screaming and running for the door to help Belinda. When we made it out into the hall, we saw that the person was attempting to drag her to the elevator. Even though she was fighting as hard as she could, she was losing and getting closer to the elevator. Thankfully, my uncle came out of his room to see what was going on and saw Belinda being dragged away. He didn't hesitate to attack the person in the mask. Once he hit them a few times across the head, they dropped her and ran off down the hall. They made it to the stairwell and disappeared. We all ran to her to see if she was okay. She was obviously scared and upset, but thankfully didn't look to be hurt. Once he was sure she was all right, my uncle called hotel security and told them what had just happened, and they called the police. The four of us girls just sat there and held each other and cried. We were all so happy that Belinda was safe. Despite the hotel's attempt at catching the person by locking all the doors, the attacker still managed to get away. When the police arrived, we tried our best to describe the attacker, but since they were wearing all black and a mask, we didn't have much to go on. Belinda was pretty sure it was a man, but that was it. Over the rest of the week, we all spoke to the police several times and repeated what we had been doing the past couple of days. When my uncle heard about our little inside joke about being in town for a bachelor party and how we had been lying to the boys about our ages, he was mad, to say the least. The police told him that one of those boys was most likely the one that had grabbed Belinda. His theory was that they were trying to kidnap one of us to potentially sell us to a trafficker. Since we looked so much alike, it didn't matter which one of us opened the door. He said girls that looked like us were super popular in the rest of the world and that traffickers would pay top dollar for one of us. We were all so scared we spent the rest of the week in our room and refused to answer the door for anyone without a key. As soon as the police said it was okay for me to go home, I took the first flight back to Minnesota. I was still scared of strangers for a long time and had to go to counseling to get over the worst of it. From what my cousins told me later, they did also and found it hard to trust boys that they had just met. Unfortunately, the police were never able to find Belinda's attacker and punish him for what he had done. It had been a long time since this happened, and when we have taken family trips to Disneyland, I've caught myself wondering if one of the men walking around could be the one that tried to kidnap Belinda that night. Then I'd get a shiver down my spine and remember, it could have just as easily been me. I'm employed at a Los Angeles area hotel that was recently the scene of one of the strangest freak accidents I've ever heard of. When I say recently, I may mean as soon as yesterday, or as long as 5 years ago. I'm purposely being vague in order to protect my job and my employer's identity. Don't bother to try to find the place in which this occurred. The few accounts of the incident were reported in a way completely different from the way it happened. I'm just telling the story to make it clear to all of those reading it that life can be snuffed out like a candle, instantly and without warning. With all that out of the way, let's get to the story. When the story took place, I was 27 and had been with the hotel for around 3 years. I'd started as your run-of-the-mill bellboy, but when the opportunity to fill in at the desk came up, I took it. Then a few weeks later, when a permanent job at the desk became available, the managers gave it to me. My managers and myself could tell right off that I was much more suited to desk work. While I had always done my job to the best of my ability, I enjoyed helping people and solving their problems, far more than humping their baggage up and down stairs. Pardon me for tooting my own horn. My only aim is to lay down a small amount of background before I dive headfirst into this crazy tale. My career specifics aside, the hotel itself was always a peaceful and fair working environment. Everyone working there did their level best and on a daily basis to ensure the residents' privacy and safety. Unfortunately, on the day this happened, our usual stellar level of service was found lacking, although through no fault of our own. I guess I've led you on long enough. Let's get to the heart of the matter, shall we? My assistant and I had only just checked in one of the participants an hour earlier. The other gentleman had been in his room since the night before, apparently getting very drunk. The guest next door to him reported later hearing glass breaking at around 5 a.m. When I first heard it, I was at the desk completing the morning regular paperwork. The report of the shot made me jump from my chair. I instantly ran out into the lobby asking every employee I saw if they knew where it came from, but no one was sure. Luckily, the lobby was empty of guests since it was still early. Within a few minutes, a call from one of the members of the cleaning staff came through the desk, and I was called back to take it. She had been working in one of the 5th floor linen closets and had heard what sounded like a gunshot coming from the room across the hall from her. My assistant and I ran up to the 5th floor and knocked on the door of the room we suspected of being the source of the shot, but received no answer. I used the door key to enter, still quietly announcing our entrance just in case we were wrong, but sadly, we were not. Even though I knew a gun was involved, I was still unprepared for what I saw. Upon turning the corner of the room, I saw his body. The gentleman had apparently put a pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was obviously long gone, so I instructed my assistant to call 911 and request they enter through the service entrance in order to not draw attention. You may see this as a crude act, but my job was to think about the hotel's reputation, regardless of my personal feelings. I'm sure the man didn't care. He ended himself in a public place. He had to have known some poor employee would find him. He obviously had no regard for anyone else. Whether you know it or not, people die in hotels on a regular basis, so the police and paramedics were familiar with our practices. When they arrived at the room, they did their job and soon allowed the paramedics to take him away. They gave us the okay to clean the room, and within an hour, it looked just as it had before. Like I said, we were very well versed in cleaning up after the deceased, no matter the way in which they pass. I was a little shaken up, but I did my best to stay composed. I was in a position of leadership, and I didn't want to let the situation get out of hand. Anyone who felt unable to continue work was allowed to go home, and the rest of us had a short meeting in the office so we could air out our concerns. That lasted about an hour, and then we all returned to our work. We tried to return to our normal day's routine, and until around 11 a.m. that morning we had. However, some short time after then, I received a call from another girl in housekeeping. She was obviously upset. Through her tearful words, she told me that when she entered a room to clean it on the 6th floor, she found a man that appeared to be dead on the floor. I'm sure you are thinking the same thing. No way. You gotta be kidding me. I could tell she wasn't, so this time I called the cops myself. They didn't have to be asked this time. They entered through the service entrance once again and met me in the room. I guess they were a bit suspicious about the circumstances because the same detectives arrived to investigate the scene. I left them alone to do their jobs once again and went back to work. Now I was starting to be confused rather than shaken up. Not even hotels have 2 unrelated deaths in the same day. The chances were astronomical that they weren't. All I could do was wait for the detectives to contact me and let me know what was up. An hour or so later, a knock came at my office door. It was one of the detectives. What he told me next is still the craziest story I've ever heard to this day. From what we could tell, the bullet from what occurred this morning on the 5th floor went through the guy's head, through the wall, and diagonally up the floor of this guy's room and hit him in the heart. We were unable to find it this morning, figured it was just stuck in the floor somewhere. He was dead in under a minute. Poor guy never saw it coming. That's probably why he had such a surprised look on his face. Believe it or not, this isn't the first case I've had like this. Sad thing, but it just serves to remind us that life is a precious thing and can be ended in a flash. I'm always sure to tell my wife I love her every day I leave for work, even if we just had a fight. That was it. He said bye and went back to work. My mouth was stuck open. I really thought I'd heard it all growing up in LA, but I've been proven wrong. I felt sorry for both of the poor dudes, but the second guy was just minding his own business, not hurting anyone. It turned out that he was in town to attend his mother's funeral. Now his family would have 2 funerals to attend. The guy who ended up being the cause of this mess was found a week later, to be a local guy that had just lost all of his savings he had invested in some scheme. The note that the officers found in his body stated that he had done this in the hotel so his children wouldn't possibly find him. I can respect him for that, but he didn't bother to think about us, the lowly hotel staff that would have to see his brains sprayed all over the wall. I realized I sound mean, but I still see that guy all the time in my dreams, and it's not cool, believe me. Like I said at the beginning, I posted this story to remind the readers of this sub that we could die at any time, at 6 or 60, from flu or stray bullet. Life has no guarantees or promises. Please remember this. I was recently reminded of something the detective told me. I'm always sure to tell my wife I love her every time I leave for work, even if we just had a fight. Since I first remembered that sentiment, I made sure to do the same with my wife. If there is someone special in your life, perhaps you may want to try it. It truly can't hurt. Expressing your love never can. My friend and I are having a contest to see who had the scariest episode in our lives, and I'm positive that once you see this one, you'll vote me as the winner. You may have already read the story about the broken window and the guy in the woods, but I assure you, mine will be much scarier. This took place when I was 15 years old, and although I'm 25 now, I'm still not sure of what to think of it. At that time, I was enjoying my life, and it seemed to show in my dreams. Almost every one had a positive theme, at least the ones I remembered. Yes, like any normal person, I had nightmares and still do, but they were either not that bad or I forgot them right away. That was unfortunately about to change, and on a family vacation to the hillbilly heaven of Branson, Missouri. Each year, my family tried to pick a new location to vacation in, and this year was Branson. We had been there once, when I was around 10 or 11, but since then, it had opened up a lot more attractions, especially musical theaters. We had just driven in from Oklahoma City, so everyone in the car was tired. Thankfully, my parents were meticulous planners, so our hotel rooms were ready for us when we arrived. I guess since my brother and I were approaching the age where we could be trusted, we were given our own room. Then again, maybe they wanted to get busy in peace. It didn't matter to us either way. The room was really nice. It even had its own little living area with a TV, and we managed to play Call of Duty for around an hour before we decided we should crash. Just like I figured, our folks had us up at the crack of dawn. It never made sense to me why they would do this. I thought the whole point of vacation was to get some rest and relaxation. Instead, they have us up at 8 a.m. and we'd have to sit around for another 2 hours waiting for them. Once they were finally ready to go, my dad would drive us from place to place like his butt was on fire while yelling at Jeff and I the whole time. We couldn't understand why he was so angry and stressed out. That's probably why I don't go anywhere on my holidays off. It always seemed more relaxing just to sit and chill at home. Anyway, we did the usual touristy things that people do in Branson, riding the ducks and stuff like that. We made it back to our hotel room at about 5 to clean up and go out to dinner. I think my dad had some plan for us to go see the Presleys or some hillbilly crap, but we were saved when my brother got sick during dinner, so the remainder of the evening was spent in our room playing the Wii. Jeff started feeling a bit better by bedtime, so we decided to stay up a little longer playing games. I called it about midnight, and it wasn't long before I was asleep. She came at some point, I'm not sure when. I could tell that I'd been asleep for quite some time because it was so hard to move. Then again, that could have been part of her power. Not until later did I see the clock, but that would only tell me the time then and not when she made her entrance. I wasn't aware of her presence at first, but I was already able to see most of the room. My brother was sprawled out in his bed with the covers half off of him, basically the way he'd always slept. The air conditioner's low roar was there hanging in the room, but much quieter than I'd remembered. I just lay there for a moment, taking in the peacefulness of the overall environment, until I noticed a figure just on the edge of my vision. I tried to turn my head sideways to get a better look, but it wouldn't move. This made me a little concerned, and I still had no reason to get upset. Most of the room was still within my sight. When I switched my eyes to the foot of the bed, hers locked with mine. At first, all I saw was her eyes, but her head seemed to grow larger and out of the darkness until it was nearly all I could see. I could feel the rest of her, climbing slowly in occasional bursts up my bed. This was when I truly began to panic. The battle to move anything was a loss. It was like I had been frozen in a block of ice, but without the cold. Even when I felt her hands touch me, I was unable to shrink away. I so badly wanted to scream, just get one short sound out. The tears ran down my temples. I was sure I was going to die. She continued to crawl up the bed until her face sat a mere few inches from mine. This was the first time I could clearly see how horrible her face was. She resembled your stereotypical old witch with hairy moles on her chin and black crooked teeth. Her breath was the worst mix of rotting flesh and musty air. When she first saw my tears, they seemed to excite her. She began shrieking and laughing, running her filthy claw-like fingers in small circles on my bare chest. My fight to break free from her continued, but it gained me nothing. Her weight on my body was starting to be too much, and I began fighting for air. It became obvious to me that her goal was to suffocate me. I knew I couldn't last long without oxygen, and I would be dead in a matter of seconds. Just as I took in my last breath, I woke up. My body took over from there, grasping at any air it could get. Basically, I was hyperventilating. Within a minute or so, I was finally getting control of my breathing and was able to realize what was going on. I stayed laying there on my back for a minute, maybe to reassure myself I was still alive, and very happy to be so. Slowly sitting up, I looked at my body for any scratches or marks, but none were there. I also looked around the room for any sign of the witch, but the only other person in the room was Jeff, still sprawled out in the same position. That was the first time I began analyzing the whole occurrence. Had I really been asleep, having a bad dream, or was it real and what I saw actually happened? Jeff was in the same sleeping position as in my dream, and I'd been able to see everything in the room while being asleep. If I had, that would make that horrid woman real. There was no way I was going to be able to figure it out that night, if ever. I did know I was way too scared to go back to sleep. The alarm clock on the side table said it was 4:35 a.m. Although I was still very tired, I was too afraid to fall asleep, so I went back to the TV and fired up the video. I guess I did nod off again at one point because my mom's banging on the door woke me up at 7:45. After 3+ hours of waiting, I was happy to be back on the road for home. Despite our vacation only lasting the weekend, I got the impression that everyone was happy for it to be over. I know I was, and not just because of the nightmare. Speaking of the nightmare, I found myself scared to go to sleep for at least a week, but once it looked as if though she wasn't coming back, my life went back to normal. Because of my age, I got to avoid family vacations for the rest of my time at home. I made sure to schedule work especially heavy that time of year in order to avoid them. Although I say life soon went back to normal, my fear that she could return still haunts the back of my mind. At least once a week I find myself trying to decide if that was truly a nightmare or if that thing was actually in that hotel room with my brother and I. I've done a small bit of research surrounding sleep paralysis and the like, and I know the hag, as many call her, is a common part of this problem. If the horror that I went through that night was just a scary dream, I hope I have outgrown the condition. But if that woman and her group of monsters are truly real, I can only pray they got their required dose of fear that night, and that they never return to reap another from my newborn son. Here's a story of a scary incident that took place in the early 90s. At that time, I was just out of high school and working my first full-time job. I had no interest in going to college then, so my only option was joining the workforce and becoming an actual adult. My job was a night auditor. If you're not aware what a night auditor does, the job basically requires you to do everything from check-in guests all the way to setting up wake-up calls and balancing accounts for the night. Despite only being 19 and at the usual level of lazy for a kid my age, I loved my job. Well, I loved it most of the time, but when crazy things happen, like what I'm about to tell you, it was probably the worst job in the world. Possibly the scariest thing I have ever experienced occurred on a quiet Monday night. Now, before you hear this story, I should tell you more about the hotel I worked in. It will help in the telling of the story later on, so don't worry. The place was set up in a similar way to those run-down hotels you see in movies. You had your usual covered drive-in at the check-in desk that led into a big parking lot with spaces in front of the rooms. Despite the fact that there were 3 stories, I was told never to check anyone into any of the third-story rooms because of strange occurrences in the past, but that's a tale for another time. Although I may make the place sound massive, in truth I could see every room from the desk. My only blind spots sat just around from the windows, and I could check those on my walkthroughs. Since I'm on the subject of walkthroughs, I'll place the actual beginning of my tale right here. As I said, this happened on a quiet Monday, which was one of the slowest nights for customers. During the tourist season, we did pretty brisk business all through the week and weekends, but it was the middle of the winter, and the hotel had never been smack dab in the middle of the tourist roads. You had to see one of our billboard ads or know where we were at already. So, if I was lucky enough to check anyone in, it was usually one of our regulars. The night this happened, I had just finished one of my walkthroughs, checking that there was ice in the machines, things like that. I had just returned to the desk and sat down in the office located behind it. From what I remember, I was doing paperwork when I happened to look up at the bay of monitors for the security cameras and spotted a guy in black standing just out of view of the windows out front. Being naturally curious, I continued watching him while he stood there looking around for anyone in the area. I guess when he was satisfied that nobody was watching, he pulled a black ski mask from his pocket and put it over his head and face. I didn't see a weapon at the time, but I sure wasn't going to give him time to pull it out. Since I had a good idea what he had planned, I ran as fast as I could to lock the front door so he couldn't do it. I could see him through the windows as we both ran for the doors, but I got to them first and turned the deadbolt just before his hand touched the handle. The mask he was wearing had a hole for the mouth, and a sneer of disgust slowly grew on it. Seeing how angry this made him, my stupid, smug self mocked him with the biggest grin I could manage. He slowly raised his hand, and that's when I finally saw the gun. The smug grin disappeared from my face and was replaced by a look of abject fear. I couldn't see my face, of course, but I could tell from the smile growing on his he knew he was in charge. When his hand reached my eye level, I could literally see down the barrel of the gun. As he pulled back the hammer, the cylinder turned and clicked. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. Then, like he was putting an exclamation at the end of a sentence, he put the barrel to the glass. When he put his finger on the trigger, I honestly saw my life flash before me. It hadn't been a long one, and it was about to end. That's about the time I peed myself. I'm not gonna lie, it happened. For a second, I considered trying to make a break for it, but when I attempted to move, I was frozen stiff. So, in an act of acceptance, I closed my eyes and waited for the shot, but it never came. I have no idea how long I stood there, but when I finally got the courage to open my eyes, he was gone. I could feel my knees about to buckle, and a queasiness filled my stomach. There was a row of chairs next to me, and I managed to sit down before I collapsed. As I sat there, crouched over with my head between my knees, fighting the urge to vomit, I tried to figure out why I wasn't dead. Did he take pity on me? Did he not have the guts? Really, I didn't care. I was just happy to be alive, and if I ever meet that guy again in different circumstances, I'll thank him for not pulling that trigger. The idea of calling the cops went through my head, but I decided against it. They would most likely be unable to catch the guy, and I couldn't identify him. What I was going to do was change my pants and quit this terrible job at this terrible hotel and go to college after all. I finished out the night and quit the next morning. I told my boss about the attempted holdup and the guy with the mask, just out of courtesy, in case he decided to come back, and that was it. I enrolled at a local community college that spring. After my 2 years there, I moved on to a large Californian university where I eventually earned my MBA and went on to work at various corporations around Southern California and Nevada. I'm finally working for myself as a consultant and employ several others. Despite the overwhelming fear I felt that night, the incident ultimately turned out to be the wake-up call I needed to get my life in the right direction. I had spent so long in school I was in no hurry to move on to another. Besides, I'd witnessed the success of some of my friends were having without going to college, and I'd convinced myself it had nothing to offer me. However, I learned that night a lesson I'd like to pass on to young people just out of school. If you truly believe college is not for you, don't go. But you owe it to yourself to be very sure. Because if your life turns out to be different than you had hoped, you could end up like either one of those men, staring at each other through those glass doors, all those years ago.
This all happened 15 years ago. I was about 19 years old when I was offered a job by my cousin to work for our uncle's glass business. They install giant glass windows into tall buildings and skyscrapers. Not that it's too relevant to the story, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The catch to the job was that I had to temporarily move to Destin, Florida from Tampa. My cousin lived in Russellville, Alabama, and I really wanted to go visit the family there and leave with them together to go back down to Destin. Now, this was my first long-distance road trip, and my very first trip away from my immediate family. Back then, I was driving a green Mercury Sable, a car barely capable of getting groceries back home, but in my invincible youth, I didn't really care about that. I was just so pumped to be spreading my wings and getting out into the real world that the risks didn't really concern me. My mom and dad had tried to get me to plan and pack better, knowing the trip could have its pitfalls. But I mean, it wasn't like the trip was going to last days, and also fast food exists, so I wasn't really stressing out about that. I packed for the trip, and I'm going to be staying there for a few months in Destin, but they were really adamant on me bringing food, water, emergency supplies, etc. I declined because it wasn't the 1930s, and of course there's gas stations at every exit, and I had a Razor flip phone. My way of thinking was, what could possibly happen on two busy interstates? It wasn't like I was going to some far-off country with no cell service. Anyways, fast forward to the trip. I'm a Florida boy, so I had no idea Alabama could get so cold, and I also had no idea that the heat was broken in my car. I had never really used it. At first I'm thankful because by the time I reach Alabama, I'm tired as hell, and I had made a lot more stops than I anticipated. I still had a few hours to go, and the cold air was keeping me wide awake. Finally, I pull off the interstate and I start heading through these smaller numbered roads. The roads didn't really have conventional names like in Florida. They were just numbered, which I kind of found odd. After driving on those a bit, I started being sent down gravel roads. This was the days of MapQuest, so I didn't have a GPS guiding me through the just paved roads or rerouting me around roadblocks. I was starting to get really hungry, and I thought back to my parents telling me to pack food. I really should have listened. The sketchiest thing with MapQuest was that you just printed out the directions, so you didn't really have a map to fall back on. So going out of your way to find fast food at an exit came with the potential of legitimately getting lost. So I had basically passed a few times to turn off for food because I was tired and I just didn't want to chance it. Instead, however, I was looking for something off the side of the road that I could easily pull in and then back out with no fuss. But more importantly, no risk of getting lost. My prayers were answered a little down the road when I saw a beat-up old country grocery store on my right-hand side. It didn't even have a name. It just said grocery right across the front of the white building. I pulled in because the light shining across the grocery sign was on, but found it odd that most of the lights inside were off. I'm not gonna lie, this gave me the creeps a little, but it didn't stop me from going up to the door. I was really starving and maybe this was a 24-hour place, but I wasn't sure. I saw a shadow move across the back of the long aisles as I approached the glass door and surprisingly opened it with ease. At this point, I was honestly half expecting them to be closed due to the lack of lighting inside, and I was really hoping that the owner would take pity on a tired traveler and let me grab some snacks. I then called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No one answered. I then said something along the lines of, "I saw you when I pulled up, and I was hoping you're still open." Again, no answer. Now, this was really naive of me, but I assumed that maybe the owner was just older or something and maybe he couldn't hear me, or that maybe he was deaf, so I went further back into the store. It honestly didn't really smell that great inside there, and I had hoped that they at least had some chips or something. At least those are sealed. Suddenly a man emerged from the back. "Oh, I'm so sorry, we were just about to close. How can I help you?" he asked with a smile. He clearly made me jump out of my skin at first, but he seemed friendly enough. Not the old man I was picturing before, but actually a much younger guy, maybe in his 30s. "Yeah, I just came up from Florida. It's been a long drive. I was kinda hoping you guys had something to eat for the trip." "Oh, we have plenty. What are you looking for exactly?" he said without taking his eyes off me. The guy had a really weird unblinking stare that just really put me on edge. But what made me the most uncomfortable was his smile. He smiled big, but his eyes never moved. As in, the only way you could tell he was conveying an emotion was by looking at his mouth. The rest of his face stayed the same. Most people, you could tell they're smiling even if their mouth was covered, because you smile with your whole face. But not this guy. "Yeah, I just wanted some chips, maybe a Coke. Do you have any Doritos?" "Of course," he said, walking past me. He locked the door behind me before turning and smiling. "I don't want anyone else walking in," he chuckled. Him locking the door was really creepy, but I just shrugged it off because the reasoning was pretty sound, even though it felt off. "Follow me," the guy said as he walked towards the back of the store. I was young, but I really should have been smart enough to know that the store owners generally don't give customers a tour of the store, but I had lived a pretty sheltered life. I could feel that something was off, but I didn't want to offend him by asking questions like, "What's that smell?" and other things. We get to the back of the store to where those plastic flaps hang that separate the customer side and the back end. When the man sticks his hand through, parting through the plastic, then saying, "Right this way." Now alarm bells are starting to go off in my head, especially as he starts looking around and past me like someone who's selling drugs and trying to watch out for the police. Back there?" I ask and start to back up a little. That's when I then notice chips right beside me on the aisle. The guy noticed me see the chips and then says, "Yeah, back here. We got all our good stuff in the back. You can come take your pick." By this time, I had found the source of the buzzing. Flies are flying over the meat section, and the dim light that's reflecting off the packaging lets me know that it's been sitting there a while. "I'll just take this if that's alright," I say nervously as I grab a bag off the shelf next to me and then start backing up towards the door. "Trust me, those are no good. I have way better stuff back here." He smiles again, gesturing for me to head back. I fake pat my pockets, then saying, "Oh man, I think I forgot my wallet in my car. I'll be right back." As soon as the words left my lips, I then spun around and did a light jog to the front, increasing with speed as I approached the door. I make it to the door and twist the lock a couple times until I hear the click. I push the door open and turn back to look at where the man is, but he's gone. I jumped into that car and sped the fuck out of that parking lot and didn't stop again until I reached my cousin's house. This was by far one of the eeriest and creepiest things that have ever happened to me. This happened when I was 7 years old with my twin sister and mother. We had just entered our local grocery store, Surefine, when a man no more than 10 feet in front of us glanced over and immediately whipped his head back towards us. Now, as a quick side note, my twin and I at that age were always dressed in matching dresses, and we had long blonde hair that had always got us looks of awe and affection. But this was different. He was a bulky middle-aged man of mid-eastern descent, and had stopped what he was doing to fully look at us up and down. A really husky smile crossed his scruffy face. My mother paid no mind to this, as she was no stranger to creepy men herself. I immediately grumbled to my twin Cass how creepy it was the way the man was looking at us. So as we turned left to start going through the aisles, Cass and I turned and we saw the man walking toward us with his shopping cart. When we first made eye contact, he immediately turned his attention to a table with baked goods on it, which kinda stood out to Cass and I more than if he had just kept walking normally. So my mother's obviously shopping and Cass and I just keep glancing back and we keep catching the man at the end of every aisle that we enter, just staring with no expression on his face, and even from a slight distance, he was seemingly breathing like really weirdly. I also noticed that his cart continues to remain empty, except for the baked goods that he grabbed when we had first looked back at him. We tell my mother, but she just rolls her eyes at us and tells us that he probably thinks we're following him because we keep looking at him. The man disappears as we hit the last of the aisles, and Cass and I are already on a completely different topic by now, when we're heading for the registers, having almost completely forgotten about him within minutes. We're about to make it to the register when my sister asks my mom for a candy bar, and I quickly join, to which she then angrily replies that we don't have the money for it. We're both pouting at this point, and she threatens to leave us as she begins putting things on the conveyor belt. But then Cass and I watch my mother turn to face us again, when her expression completely changes and her eyes shift behind us. It's the man. He's sweating profusely at this point, and he's literally less than like a foot behind us. Cass and I immediately take a step forward towards our mother. The man laughs awkwardly, then apologizes, saying,
"Sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to scare you girls. You're all just so beautiful. These girls, are they yours?"
My mother kind of scoffs to this and then goes, "Yeah, they're mine." And he does that same awkward laugh again, then saying,
"I couldn't help but notice that you don't have the money to get them what they want. How old are they, and you as well? I could help you. I have lots of money. Money's no problem for me."
My mother's face then furrows in confusion and annoyance, then snapping, excuse me?" Like clockwork, he laughs again like it's some big joke, then says,
"I'm serious, how much?"
My mother stares at him blankly for a moment, and he continues,
"How much for the girls? I'd like both of them, but if you can only part with one, I could still make that work. I'll give you the money. Just name your price, and I can give them anything they want. Any candy they want."
He grins yet again and wipes his brow, looking down at us. My mother doesn't respond to him, just looks at us and growls, "Here, now." So we do as we were told, which was fine by us because we didn't want to be anywhere near this creepy man. The cashier was a teenage girl no older than 17, and she was just completely wide-eyed watching this conversation occur as she silently continues to scan our groceries. Once we were next to my mother, she then growls at the man, "If you so much as lay one fucking finger on my kids, I'll break it off and shove it down your throat," which were some pretty big words coming from my 4'11" mother. But the man's face darkens, and without even purchasing anything, he walks around the cash register and exits, but he doesn't get far. The entire front of the store is glass, so moments later we watch as he presses his face against the glass trying to see in. leaving a sweaty face print behind. Now, at this point, the cashier's alerting her manager and asking him to call the police. My mother immediately assures them that that's not necessary and just asks the manager to walk us out to her car. We see no sign of the man as we unload our groceries and hop into the car. My mother quickly drives us home once we sit in the car for a few minutes, scanning for any signs that he might be waiting in a car or something. We eventually made it home safely and nothing ever came of it. I don't know what happened to the man, but I truly hope he never convinced anyone to give him their kid. That's absolutely horrific to think about.
I'm a bartender, and to me, bartending is about so much more than just serving drinks. It's about community. So you can only imagine how heartbroken I was when the pandemic hit and we were basically forced to just close our doors indefinitely. I tried to find other sources of income. I even tried running a cocktail delivery service for a while. I did okay, but just not nearly enough to live comfortably. I was looking at having to sell my car, pawn a guitar or two, but the final straw came when it looked like I might have to put my dog up for adoption. I can put up with a lot of nonsense, man, but the idea of having to take Ripper to the pound, never. I just couldn't. That's when I got desperate. Desperate enough to consider something pretty drastic. To make it clear, I'm a guy in my late 20s, not completely awful looking, but definitely not Brad Pitt. So I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to many of you when I say that my financial salvation came when I started yep, you sure could guess it, an OnlyFans account. It all started when I heard two of my friends talking about dad bods. Dad bods, I remember saying. You'd for real prefer a beer gut to a six-pack? Okay, not like a beer gut, she said with a giggle, but like, I don't know, like the slightly out-of-shape look, it just feels real, and besides, gym rats just don't seem fun, you know? Dad bods are like, chill. That was probably some bad phrasing on my part, but you get the picture. The whole dad bod thing had been around for a while, but when I told the girl she must have something of a niche interest, she just laughed. Nope, it's way more popular than you think. And she brings up this OnlyFans profile of some Nick Offerman-looking dude who had like a ton of posts up, all with a buttload of likes and comments. This guy makes thousands of dollars a month. His profile is free to sub too, but he does a bunch of request stuff too. Watch. I'm like, no. Thinking she's about to show me this guy's junk or whatever, but no. Apparently the guy did like tuck you in videos or good morning sweetie videos where he pretends to wake up next to you before offering you breakfast and stuff. It was the tamest adult content imaginable, legitimately PG-13 stuff, and he was charging upwards of $50 for a personalized video. The whole rest of my shift, I kept thinking about that guy, thinking how happy he must be to get all this money, and his following was so wholesome too. What's not to like about a setup like that? Sure, I bet there was some steamier stuff behind a paywall somewhere, but come on. A few $1,000 a month just to tell some girl to sleep well? Why couldn't I get a piece of that sweet, sweet OnlyFans money? But nah, I'm not that guy, or at least I wasn't. I had all the confidence of a 2-day-old fawn back then, but then again, I suppose desperation drives us to do stuff out of the ordinary. It was pretty surreal setting up the account. Like I had to come up with a fake name and an attractive username. I had to take a display picture selfie and banner picture. It was a whole thing. I was doubting myself the entire time, but I still went and did it, and since all the pictures were as anonymous as I could make them, those masks helped to protect more than just my breathing, I suppose, I wasn't all that concerned about getting found out. Besides, that would pretty much be the end of the whole thing. It wasn't like I was going to actually get any followers or anything, right? Right? Well, wrong. Because maybe 3 days after, just when I was starting to forget about the whole thing, I get an email notification from OnlyFans that says, like, user 7876 is now following you, just to be as generic as possible. I'd set up my sub fee to $4.99, then when I checked the payout section, boom, like $4 was headed into my bank account at the end of the month as an upfront charge. I also had a direct message that just read, "Loving your pictures. Can't wait to see more. X." I couldn't tell who the person was. There was no bio on their account, nothing to even clue me into if they were male or female, but still, I just reply, "Thank you so much. If you know anyone who might enjoy my content, please share my profile with them." I get a "will do" in return. Then that's that. A few days later, I get another sub, then another, and by the end of the week I have a grand total of 10. Loyal but totally anonymous subscribers. The extra $40 a month was paying for most of Ripper's dog food by that point. Not the good stuff, but I didn't have to consider giving him up anymore, and that meant you can bet your butt I carried on posting. If the only way was up, then up I was going. By the end of my 6th week of OnlyFans, I had just short of 50 followers and was making just under $200 a month, and I put that down to solely me opening myself up to special requests. A lot of them came in the form of daddy stuff, which is undeniably kinky, but still mostly just sweet and affectionate. I didn't have a problem with it at all, and once I gotten a little confidence under my belt, I'd go so far as to say that I got pretty good at it. But as it turned out, the real money was in a kind of domination that was considerably less wholesome. Some people didn't want me to just be nice to them. They wanted me to be really, really mean. I remember the first time I started to feel really disillusioned with the whole thing. One special request wanted me to make a video where I basically just downright was abusive. Then when I read that they wanted me to call them all kinds of slurs, I just felt gross. It was the first time I'd had actual confirmation that some of my subscribers were gay guys, but that wasn't really it. It was the things they wanted me to call them. They're what made me feel deeply uncomfortable. I replied to the DM saying, "Sorry, I can't do that. Is there anything else I can work in for you?" But no. The reply was almost instant, and it consisted of them just doubling the dollar amount they were offering. The first time they did that, I actually got a little offended. Did they honestly think that I just caved because they flashed some cash? It was about principle, not making money. So you can guess how straight up gross I felt when they threw a 4-figure amount at me. And I feel gross just typing this, but yeah, I accept it. I called them some of the most despicable things that have ever come out of my mouth. And you know, I did a pretty good job of it too. I wanted that money, and it's honestly shameful how quickly I abandoned my principles. I felt bad, really bad for like a few days, but when another offer came in from a different user asking the same thing for the same price, I just couldn't say no. The bar wasn't even paying us any sort of unemployment anymore. We were like 3 months into lockdown and the money just sort of dried up. So by then, whether I liked it or not, I was almost entirely dependent on OnlyFans for my income. And when the requests got worse, I had little choice but to fulfill them. Looking back, I shouldn't have let it escalate. I could have kept things at the level they were at and still lived pretty comfortably until the New York City bar scene opened up again. But no, my greed took over, and at one point, I bought an entire pack of wet Italian sausage just so a guy could imagine what his junk would look like after I stamped on it in steel-toed work boots. I thought this was as bad as things would get. I was wrong. The red line event for me was getting a follower from another user 827484 style account, the anonymous kind you always get the weirdest DMs or requests from. The guy threw an obscene dollar amount at me, but also mentioned that some of that money was for procuring materials, as he put it. Long story short, this person wanted me to head down to an apartment building where a Hispanic lady was selling puppies. I was to go down there, pick one up, then bring it back to my apartment. I asked why, but they wouldn't tell me. They just gave me some spiel about being genuine and being a huge source of potential income in the future. But this was a puppy. Nothing good could have come out of mixing OnlyFans and baby animals. And what do you know? I was right. I won't go into too much detail about what this user wanted me to do, but it was some of the most evil, heinous stuff I'd ever heard. They wanted me to hurt the puppy. Not just kill it, hurt it, over the course of days, maybe even weeks from some of the stuff that they were DMing me. When I outright denied their request, the threats began. Whenever I blocked an account, another one would pop up and pay the sub fee, knowing it would be returned when I inevitably blocked them. And by the time I started getting scared that this person or group of people I could never tell would get a hold of my contact details, I had to be brave enough to just click that little delete profile button and face the music. So, I'm currently living with my mom and her boyfriend out here in New Jersey. I can't actually describe how much it sucks to be living in a garage with my 30th birthday fast approaching, but I also know my life could be so much worse. Every time I miss Williamsburg, every time I miss having my bank account being padded for next to no work at all, I just look over at Ripper, give him a pat and think, yeah, COVID has sucked. It's ruined a lot of lives, including mine. But at least, I have my pupper. I started an OnlyFans account a few years back now, and I've been recognized a grand total of 3 times because of my tattoos. I keep them covered up in my job because it's the kind that really doesn't like you showing off ink like that, let alone how badly they'd freak if they knew I had an OnlyFans. The point is, I like to be discreet, and my subs, for the most part, seem to understand that. The first time was about a week after my birthday. I told my subs that it was my birthday month to be discreet whilst still raking in the birthday tips. So although they didn't know exactly when I was born, they knew it was like roughly that time of the year. I had one guy give me a few looks on the subway, which isn't totally out of the ordinary if I'm honest, but just before he got off, he barely even looked at me as he said, "Happy birthday," and called me by my username. Like I said, he didn't make it obvious who he was talking to. He just ghosted immediately after, and there was no other interaction. I mean, if you're going to get recognized for OnlyFans, you could do way worse than that. Second time was by a guy who literally screeched to stop on his bike, pedaled back to look at me, then turned bright red and said, "Oh my God," and literally zoomed away like I was going to attack him or something. Granted, he could have been just having a moment, but trust me, when you have an OnlyFans, you just sort of know where people recognize you from. Anyway, now for the third time, and by far the worst time, I don't show my face on my OnlyFans, but I did used to show my tattoos, though not anymore. God bless those cute arm sleeve things. So, this one time a guy stops, visibly starts checking out my tattoos before he kind of gasps and looks up at me. I just play it cool, like there had been some kind of mistake. There blatantly hadn't, and just ignore him while I carry on reading and drinking my coffee. I half expected him to keep moving, but he didn't. He sat down next to me and started calling me by my username. I'd never been confronted like that, and it didn't exactly put me in the mood to be like, "Oh, hi, yeah, it's me." So I continued to deny it while also shooting him this look that tried to say, "Dude, stop, it's me, sure, but please just shut up." But then he reacts in such a horrid, violent way like, "What, you think I'm dumb, huh? You'll take my money? The money I work my butt off for, and you won't even acknowledge me in the street?" That was his cue to just go off, and this guy just tore into me while an entire coffee shop and passers-by looked on. I'd rather not give him the satisfaction of repeating what he said or go into detail about how much it hurt my feelings, but I'll put it this way. I spent almost $90 on arm sleeves to cover up my tats, and I haven't been recognized since. It really did mess with me for a while, though. Like the reoccurring thought was, you were lucky he found you in the day. If that had been the night on some dark street somewhere, I might not have been nearly as lucky, and I might not have walked away at all. First of all, let me say this is not an indictment of OnlyFans. If someone wants to profit from sharing pictures of themselves or their body, that's totally their right, and I respect that. I'm not casting judgments on anyone who chooses to do so. But let me be clear. OnlyFans just about ruined my life. and I've never even set up a profile. It all kicked off not long after I broke up with a guy I'd been dating for about 3 to 4 months. As a single mom, it's way harder to get dates than I'd like it to be, but at the same time, I totally understand why someone wouldn't want to raise a child that isn't theirs. I mean, I wish more guys would be open to it. It's not like I'd never have a kid with them too, but it's just a sad fact that it puts guys off when you've got a child from a prior relationship. So you can imagine how excited I was when I met Richard. It's not his real name, but I'd rather not attract his attention, thank you very much. Having a 6-year-old son didn't seem to bother him in the least bit, and he even asked a lot of questions about him. I found the whole thing so refreshing and mature that by the time Richard asked me out, I just about bit his arm off accepting the invite. But then the first red flag appeared when he started making comments about my son, calling him Daddy. That wasn't the red flag in and of itself, it was more his reactions when I told him, no, my son has a dad and I don't want him confused as he grows up. Richard didn't seem to respect that position whatsoever and actually said some quite personal things regarding my taste in men, as well as the integrity of my son's father. It's a complicated situation, I'll concede that, but Richard's take on the whole thing was frankly disgusting and misogynistic. But given that it was a very unusual setup, I didn't want to give up on him so quickly, not since guys like him seem to be so hard to come by. But then, after 2 months of clashing, not often I should add, I had to face the music and accept that if there was a guy out there for me, it certainly wasn't him. I've dated guys for 18 months who took the breakup better than Richard. They're always rough, but I think if I actually told you what Richard did, you'd think that I was making this all up. Needless to say, his reaction totally justified my decisions to end things. End things, and that's exactly how I phrased it too. But that breakup was far from the end of my ordeal with Richard. And you know what? It's kind of my fault too. In fact, it's mostly my fault, because if I hadn't been so trusting, I wouldn't even be writing this right now. The one big mistake I made was trusting Richard to keep private certain pictures I'd sent him. I think I trusted him because, well, he sent me pictures of him too. I think that's why there's a lot less nude leaks than there are nudes. It's like Americans and the Russians in the 80s, mutually assured destruction. You release mine, well, I'll release yours. But after we broke up, I deleted all of his intimate pictures, and I was foolish enough to think that he'd also done the same. Because the next thing I know, I got a message from a friend of mine saying something like, "Oh, you have an OnlyFans. You go, girl." I had to ask her what OnlyFans was. I literally had no idea at the time. She replies like, "You're joking, right? Was this supposed to be a secret?" Immediately, I start Googling OnlyFans, and as you can imagine, I'm pretty shocked at what I see. The whole website is basically homemade lewd images, and for those that aren't familiar, and from what I could gather, the girls in question make quite a lot of money too. I mean, I wouldn't say no to an extra $2,000 a month, but I hadn't set up a profile, had I? I asked my friend to send me anything she's found with my name on it, then what do you know? There's a freaking OnlyFans profile set up in my name, and the whole preview picture in the banner was a raunchy picture that I'd sent to Richard. The profile said like free to subscribe, so I made a dummy user account to sign up, only to discover that Richard must have uploaded about 10 different pictures I'd sent to him, all with these disgusting captions that I'd rather not repeat here. I was angry, so angry, but I didn't get scared until I saw that he'd put up my home address, my actual home address, apartment number, postcode, everything. It kicked in how much danger I was in, and I just burst into tears thinking that my own selfish actions had exposed my only son to danger. I know it was all Richard, and I know if he was just normal, then yeah, it wouldn't have happened. But I'm a mother. I should know better. I'm not some attention-seeking teenager anymore. I just wanted to feel wanted, though. Surely people can understand that. In the end, I managed to get the profile taken down, and I think OnlyFans and other sites like that now make you verify your identity so stuff like that can't happen again. But what if you manage to get a hold of a girl's ID or something? The system they have doesn't completely eliminate the chance of fake profiles being set up. Like I said at the start, I don't mean to judge anyone who wants to do that kind of thing. I just hope they have their safety and security in mind because, as I think we all know, there are some serious psychos out there. Based in Richmond, Texas, 33-year-old Instagram influencer and freelance model, Janae Gagne, had the kind of lifestyle that many can only dream of having. Having amassed over 2 million followers on her various social media profiles, Gagne reportedly netted a six-figure income as the result of her many sponsorship and endorsement deals. Using the pseudonym Mercedes Moore, Gagne's social media followers included the likes of Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, Snoop Dogg, and Meek Mill, meaning that by August of 2020, she was arguably one of the most famous social media influencers on the planet. Like many of her peers, being introduced to the website OnlyFans presented Gagne with a lucrative opportunity. Interact even more intimately with her gargantuan online following, whilst also opening up a potentially massive new revenue stream. But according to Janae's father, Mark, the titanic amount of attention she received brought just as many problems as it did benefits. We kept her real private. Not even some of her friends knew her real name. They just called her Mercedes. I moved my daughter into new apartments 3 times because of my insecurities, he said late last year. The sheer number of people following her online had scared me, he continued. Some of them followed her because they admired her, loved her even, but some were crazy and obsessed. It was just obviously unhealthy. So at around 4 p.m. on Sunday, August 29th of 2020, when Mark Gagne hadn't heard from his daughter for almost 48 hours, he decided to stop by her home in Cortland Apartments to check on her. He pulled up, knocked on the door, but no one answered. Mark Gagne then pulled out his cell phone and gave his daughter a call, swearing he could almost hear it vibrating from somewhere inside. That's when he heard movement coming from inside the house. He hadn't heard from his daughter in days, and no one was answering the door to her apartment. So who was moving around inside? Mark Gagne said that he began to suspect something was horribly, horribly wrong. So in the next instant, he reeled back and sent his foot flying into the lock, kicking it open in one furious attempt. The sight that greeted him inside instantly broke his heart. There was his beloved daughter, lying lifeless at the bottom of the stairs. Her apartment had been completely trashed, and there appeared to be lipstick graffiti all over the walls of the apartment. Yet before he had a chance to read any of it, Mark Gagne heard a noise coming from upstairs. Mark says that in the heat of the moment, he thought his daughter might have fallen down the stairs and broken her neck. But hearing something coming from upstairs had him bolting up to that floor as fast as his legs could carry him. Only then did he see a man lying in a pool of his own blood, gurgling and choking with a knife stuck in his throat as the life slipped away from him. Mark demanded answers from the dying man, but it was too late. He passed away just moments after Janae's father had broken into her home. Yet in a disturbing twist of fate, Mark Gagne wouldn't be plagued by questions for very long, because after he called 911, he began to read some of the lipstick graffiti that had been scrawled on the walls. "I was used for money," read one piece. "I should have stayed in Florida," read another. The final piece Mark read was, "I wish I never loved her. Sorry to the landlord and the family." He couldn't bring himself to read any more. Although it appeared that his daughter's murderer had been scrawling over the walls for days, he'd summed up his feeling and motive in just a few short sentences, and to Mark, it only confirmed that his worst nightmares had come to life. Janae's killer turned out to be a 34-year-old Florida man by the name of Kevin Ocorto, a man with such unhealthy obsession with Janae that he somehow managed to track her down and kill her, all before taking his own life. He did not have any kind of prior arrest record in his home state, but during the subsequent investigation, police tried to establish that he'd had any prior history of mental health issues. "I don't even know how he found her," Mark Gagne later said. "I guarded my daughter. I wouldn't even let her friends know where she lived. Police still don't know how or when he got to Texas, there's so much that's still a mystery. The news of her death was broke by a Canadian rapper, Tory Lanez, who paid tribute to her with a post that read, "Rest in peace, Queen." But few of the tributes seemed to address the causes of her death. She was very cautious about her surroundings, Janae's mother, Janetta Grover, said. But unfortunately, someone basically was stalking and killed my baby. It's irrefutably horrific and abhorrent that Kevin Okorto was able to track down and kill such an innocent young woman. But it's clear that Mark Gagne's fears were justified. No matter how much he tried to keep his daughter safe, the determination her stalkers showed in locating her significantly outweighed their efforts, and somehow, a man who wasn't exceptionally computer literate was about to somehow track down her home address. Some have speculated that Okorto somehow got hold of Janae's billing information and discovered her real name and address in that way. In which case, OnlyFans has a long way to go before it can truly secure its content creators' privacy and security. So maybe, until then, the risks of having an alluring online presence will outweigh any potential financial reward. In September of 2020, a 20-year-old Australian university student posted a harrowing personal account to the popular social media site, Reddit. In it, she detailed the terrifying ordeal she'd been subjected to after posting intimate pictures of herself on a social media page known as OnlyFans, one involving obsessive stalking, internet loopholes, and ultimately, a clear and present threat to her life. Only through a completely anonymous throwaway account did she feel safe enough to share her story, adding that her local police force had finally taken action against the person responsible. But even then, the girl made it clear that her complaints should have been taken seriously long before she was in any imminent danger. According to the girl, the incidents all started after she moved back with her parents during the summer break. The girl was particularly excited to be home as the family had just bought a new puppy. By all accounts, the girl was having a ball getting to know her new furry friend. But as anyone who's ever had a puppy will tell you, to say they can be erratic would be the understatement of the century. One night, the girl awoke to hear her puppy yelping at the back door. They were in the middle of potty training, but the pup didn't quite have the hang of it yet. So she climbed out of bed, put on her slippers, and went downstairs to let the dog out. She says it was as late as 2 a.m., and there didn't seem to be another soul around as she stepped down into the night. But she soon found that she wasn't entirely alone. "I saw this figure in a car," she said. "I could tell they were looking at me, but it was pitch black outside, and I couldn't make out their face. I felt a bit uneasy, but I didn't really think anything of it. Only when I go back inside, the car started up and followed me up my driveway." The terror of such an experience is undeniable, and even though the girl was so close to home, there's no denying that being out alone in the middle of the night made her very vulnerable indeed. "I was terrified," the girl added. "I sprinted back inside and locked the door, and kept an eye out for them in case they tried to break in. But as far as I know, they just backed out of our driveway and left." When she woke up the following morning, after a terrible night of restless sleep and deep concern, the girl found an envelope inside her parents' letterbox. The envelope contained not only 20 Australian dollars in cash, but also her OnlyFans username. "I thought long and hard about how he could have found my parents' address," the girl said, "and I worked out that the problems didn't start until I shared my Amazon wish list." OnlyFans and Amazon were both adamant that their security systems prevent leaks like that from taking place. However, it appeared that wasn't the issue, as third-party sellers are not bound to the same data protection laws as large multinational companies. Although she doesn't know for certain how her stalker got her address, the girl is 90% sure that they got in touch with a third-party seller and obtained her home address in that way. Whether it was money, coercion, or intimidation that caused the seller to give up the info is another question entirely, but the fact remains that it's the most likely of all explanations. After that, when I moved back to the college town where I was studying, I stopped posting content. the girl goes on to explain. But somehow my stalker still managed to track me down. The girl said she basically closed down her OnlyFans account, then started a YouTube account because of how unsafe the former felt. Her first big blogging project was due to be a shopping trip to a local mall, but when she got to her car to depart for the day, she found it had been ransacked. The vlogging camera was missing too, she said. I know, it's my fault for leaving it in the car, but I was using it the night before, and since I lived in a gated area, I didn't think I would be unsafe. Yet she added that the camera was inside of her glove box and contained an SD card with unreleased photos and videos on it. It was almost like someone knew it was there, but as bad as that was, it only got weirder from there. She eventually contacted her building security personnel, asking if they could review security camera footage from the previous few nights. And it was through this that not only did she see a man break into her car and ignore other cars in the parking lot, but she also had proof she was being deliberately singled out for targeted harassment. After they got the camera, they walked around the duplex until stopping near my window, the girl wrote. My bedroom faces an outside street and the blinds are broken, so it's very easy to see in. I have a curtain, but it doesn't cover my window all the way. Look, what I'm trying to say is, this person watched me sleep for an hour or so. I have no idea why they didn't try to break in, but thank God they didn't. The woman explained her camera was later recovered at a nearby secondhand store, suggesting whoever is stalking her has a prior history of criminality. However, she added that the camera's memory card was missing. I know he kept it as some kind of trophy. I just know it, she added, and has since moved and hopes her stalker hasn't followed. I believe the police are still trying to track them down, but I have broken my lease and moved to a new place, so hopefully this will keep me safe. But what's so scary about the girl's story is that it seems like only a matter of time before the stalker decides to take things further. Unless they're caught, stalkers will only ever escalate their activities until their obsession reaches a deadly and permanent end.
This story happened when I moved back to Tokyo from the US in 2016. I'm originally from Japan, but my parents and I moved to the United States when I was just 6 years old. On the first day in a new high school, I was really shy and I was rather new to the community. I considered myself a rather shy person. I was a kid in a new area. It was the first day of school, and I sat down on an appropriate-looking school bench and looked around me. I instantly noticed a girl waving and walking towards me. Her name was Ami, and we would soon become great friends in the future. She later introduced me to her friend group, and I liked them instantly. They were very positive and extremely nice to me. Their names were Suki and Rumigo. Before I knew it, I had already found myself a new home. It felt like I was living there my whole life. One sunny day, we were having a picnic during our lunch break. Eventually, the conversation shifted towards urban legends. Suki started telling us about these, and she said they were allegedly real. She told us a scary story about a girl who appeared to be cut in half. Many people reported seeing her at night. Essentially, people claimed they saw a ghost girl with her guts hanging visibly out of her body. While this obviously terrified me, I was always the skeptical kind towards folklore and legends. I personally believed that they were just made for children to behave or something to scare people with. Suki eventually asked her grandfather about the story, and he explained it to her. Apparently, this thing was called a teke teke. Legend had it that a girl was murdered by her classmates on a railroad. Her body was cut in half when they left her on the rails, and a train ran her over. And now, the ghost haunts people who walk by railroads at night. Suki eventually told us this, and there was a short silence. We all looked at each other and laughed out loud, except for Suki. She was dead serious. I told her that she'd been watching too many horror movies, and that things like this just don't exist in real life. We giggled a bit more, but Suki's face remained stone cold. She really believed it. I commended Suki's efforts to scare us, but let her know promptly that she failed. She rolled her eyes, and she seemed visibly upset. I knew she was a big fan of this stuff, but I never thought she'd believe it. She then told us, okay, if you girls are so sure that it's fake,
Why don't we go test it ourselves? We don't have anything to lose, right? My laughter stopped immediately. While I didn't believe in the legends, I was still hesitant to go out in the middle of the night to some abandoned area. I was willing to prove that ghosts didn't exist, but not that badly. I had no problem proving Suki wrong, but crazy people and animals in the middle of the night were an actual threat. So, are we going to some abandoned canal or sketchy location to prove this? I asked Suki. No, the trial will take place in our school, Suki said. I let out a sigh of relief. I mean, it was our school. We've all been there before, and there's plenty of people at all hours. So, what will we do? I asked Suki. Suki told us that we would be trying to summon a girl named Hanako-san. The urban legend regarded a girl who committed suicide on the third stall of the third floor of her school. We would have to enter that stall of our school, say her name, and punch 3 times on the stall doors. Then, she might appear. We decided to meet after our extracurricular activities in a third-floor toilet at around 7 p.m. For context, I joined a few classes where I volunteered to help my art teachers at school. It was a great way to spend my free evenings. Making origami and hanging out with people my age beat being bored at home any day. The extracurricular itself ended at around 7 p.m., so it was a perfect time to meet with the girls in the bathroom. There really weren't going to be any kids to bother us, and the school was technically open at this time. And so we proceeded with our plan. Roughly after 7 p.m., we met in the toilet. Suki had already prepared a few candles and warned us not to turn on any lights. She had her hood up. It was already giving me the creeps. We stood in a circle and looked at each other with straight faces. It was starting to look like some sort of cult. At this point, I was already getting creeped out. She rose her finger to her mouth and let us know that we were supposed to be silent during this whole time. She then took a red pencil out of her bag and drew something on the third stall. She told us quietly to hold each other's hands, and we did. We held each other's hands tightly, and Suki started mumbling something under her breath. She then said loudly 3 times, "Hanako-san, can you hear me?" I closed my eyes out of fear. At this point, I even started to doubt myself and believed that something might actually appear. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty. My legs started to give out. I slowly opened my eyes. Nothing was there. Suki tried a few more times, but after a few more minutes she gave up and we left the stall. I was beyond relieved. Nothing happened. I looked at the other girls and they seemed a bit spooked but relieved as well. Suki finally gave in and said maybe we were right. She put out the candles and we packed our stuff and left. It was already dark outside and I knew my mom would be mad. I forgot to text her earlier that I would be later than usual. When we left school, I tried to reach inside my backpack and find my phone to text my mom. I shuffled around, but it wasn't there. Damn it, I must have left it on the windowsill of the bathroom. I looked up at that bathroom window, and the thought of going back in there sent chills up my spine. I eventually excused my friends and ran into the building. There was no one there except for me and the janitor working the late shift. I went up the stairs and slowly went by the bathroom doors. There was a dead silence by the opening. No lights were on. I was afraid to go in there. I heard a rumbling noise from the inside. No way I'm going in there, I told myself. But I stopped for a second and thought about it. I'm not gonna leave my phone in there. If I allow that to happen, someone's just gonna take it the next day. And what, I'm gonna allow that to happen because of something fake? And what would I tell to my mom after losing a $1,000 phone? No way. I'm going in. I walked in and saw my phone straight away at the end of the bathroom. I tried turning on a light, but it wasn't working. That's weird. I had no time to waste, so I ran quickly to get my phone. I was happy to have it. But before I turned around and waved to my friends outside, I heard a thudding sound behind me. This time, twice as loud. It was coming from the third stall. I was paralyzed by fear. I looked up and down the stall and spotted a brown robe swinging over it. There was blood coming out from the bottom of it. I didn't want to see anything more. I ran out of the toilet as fast as I could, never even thinking about looking back. I told no one about it and tried to block it from my mind. If it really happened, this would destroy my mental health and the perception of my world. It couldn't be true. I couldn't have seen a real ghost. It can't be. As I came back home, I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I was so afraid she would come to me. I was up all night on guard, looking around my room. I even had a nightstand lamp turned on because I couldn't see the whole room clearly. I felt like a wreck the next day. My mom tried to ask me what's wrong. I looked so tired and paranoid. but I didn't speak a word to her during breakfast. I was paranoid and terrified of the thought of going to my first class. It was on the 3rd floor. But what I saw as I walked up the stairs was somehow even more petrifying. The toilet doors were blocked by a few police officers, and around them was yellow police tape. One of my friends approached me and told me about a horrific incident. Apparently, a lower grade girl committed suicide yesterday right after we left the bathroom. She waited for us to leave and then attempted to cut her wrist. That didn't work, so she hung herself. It then clicked, and I realized what I saw last night. It wasn't a ghost, it was a person. I was an eyewitness to that girl taking her own life, and I did nothing. I couldn't believe I just ran away in anticipation of it being a ghost. I burst into tears, still telling no one that I was there. Afraid of the consequences, I just told my friends that she must have came in there after I retrieved my phone. It may not be a ghost, but the guilt of what happened that night will haunt me for the rest of my life. I always considered myself to be a low-risk type of person. I never really had gotten into any super dangerous or life-threatening situation. But that changed 4 summers ago. You'll believe me by the end of the story when I tell you that this experience changed my life forever. We were just let out on break by our school, and my friends were eager to go and do something stupid as usual. I was the responsible one of the group, if you will. It was honestly quite surprising that I even hung out with these adrenaline junkies. I was never a risk taker. I would always consider the consequences to my action before I took them. Many times, I was the balancing factor to my friends' crazy antics. Despite this, I loved hanging out with them. The dynamic of them encouraging me to try new things and push me out of my comfort zone was something I never really could find in other people. But when I turned 18, peer pressure started skyrocketing. I felt like I was somehow missing out on something, that I was living my early years of life in fear. This, combined with the people I was hanging out with, brought me to make some really irrational decisions. Whether that be shoplifting or driving with them at incredibly high speeds, I caught myself constantly trying out new, irresponsible decisions. This tolerance towards doing stupid things is what I largely blame for what happened to me. Summertime hit and the temperature was starting to skyrocket. While most teenagers went to a friend or neighbor's pool to swim, we wanted to try something a little different. There was a nearby water reserve which was strictly prohibited to swim in. During the daytime, security patrolled the area and made sure no one jumped in that water. But at nighttime, it was open to anyone brave enough to swim among the various dangerous fish over there. My friends wanted to go there and take a dip with me, cool off during the hot Korean night. Rumor had it that the lake was haunted and that a lot of sketchy things have happened there. This, of course, only strengthened our urge to go there and take a swim late at night. Of course, I was hesitant at first, but as peer pressure crept in, I went along with it. We arrived at the lake around midnight. We were already in our swimsuits. There were some lights around the complex, but the lake was pitch dark. It was impossible to see where you were even swimming or standing or how deep the water was. Any of the said large marine life in the lake were going to be impossible to spot. This really frightened me. Sure, I was opening up to taking new risks, but this was really pushing that as well. After a lot of convincing from my friends, we all headed to the lake. One of my friends guided us through the shrubs. We used a large pocket knife to cut down the leaves and somehow make our way through the fence. When we got to the lake, I reluctantly got in. It really wasn't that bad at first. The water was quite nice and it was a lot of fun swimming in the dark with my friends. We kept swimming around for about 15 minutes while cracking jokes and making fun of each other. But as we were swimming, I noticed something, specifically someone out in the distance. I saw a mystic white figure out in the distance. It quickly faded away in the water. I shrugged it off as maybe just some light reflecting and kept swimming. Eventually, my friends wanted to do a dare and see who would go out farthest in the lake at night. Not being in my best decision-making mindset, I agreed, but I made sure to stay relatively close to the shore and grab onto a small concrete wall. Something deep inside me still felt off about the whole idea, but I went through with it. We all swam as far as we could. Several of my friends stopped halfway. The water was several meters deep at this point. At that point, it was just me and 2 of my other friends in the lake. We started swimming back, but as I was heading back, I noticed something under the water. It seemed to be a person under there. I looked closer at what it could possibly be and felt a tugging on my foot. I tried to look around and see what was happening, but the tugging just got harder and harder. I tried to wriggle out and see what could be doing this. Was I stuck on something? Why was it pulling me downwards? At this point, I was screaming and panicking. My friends noticed and started quickly swimming towards me. I tried grabbing at my feet, but something pushed my hands away. At this point, my head was completely under the water. I was losing oxygen, and I was losing it fast. My life was flashing before me, confusion and fear running through my mind, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I tried to make sense of the situation, but I couldn't. There was no way this was some large fish or lake shark. It felt like a human arm was pulling at my ankle downwards. My friends were trying to pull me up towards the surface, but it was no use. I even felt some of my friends trying to kick down or thrash at whatever was pulling me down, but even that didn't work. Eventually, I felt a sharp pain at my foot and started to black out, still confused as to who or what was trying to drown me. I woke up at the hospital a day later, completely unaware of my surroundings. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some sort of bad dream. As I started to panic and try and leave the bed, a nurse and doctor walked in along with some of my friends and they calmed me down. They explained to me everything that happened. I asked them what was pulling me down in the lake and they didn't have a clear answer. The doctors and nurses said it was most likely some sort of lake shark or predatory fish. Apparently they can get very large and extremely heavy and are certainly powerful enough to yank down a person of my size. But that's when I asked them, how exactly did they get me out of the water? The nurse looked down at my foot and that's when I noticed it. Most of my foot was removed. All of my toes were gone and the side of my foot was mutilated. I turned pale. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to see it. The nurse explained to me that my friends had to use the large pocket knife they had on hand and cut a large part of my foot off in order to save me. She said I would most likely have died if they didn't do so, as those fish don't tend to let go of their jaws. I was devastated and in complete disbelief. A few days later, my friends checked in on me to see how I was doing. We eventually discussed what happened. My friend explained to me that when they rushed towards me, they saw what seemed to be a human hand pulling me down in the water. They tried pulling me, but the arm was just too powerful. They even tried hitting at it or cutting it, but it didn't seem to work. As a last resort, they had to amputate part of my foot. They explained to me the legend of the Molukwishin. As per Korean legend, vengeful spirits that were taken from this world too early often sought violent actions against unsuspecting victims. The lake we were swimming at was apparently a common spot for the mafia to execute people and dump their bodies too. They often lurk where their bodies are left and try and subject people to the same form of death. In the case of a water ghost, they drag you down and never let go. This explained everything. The person I saw in the distance, the ghostly silhouette in the water, the feeling of the human hand on my ankle. My friends tried to explain to the police and doctors that this was some sort of paranormal activity and that it didn't look like a fish at all. But the emergency services obviously did not believe us. As indicated by the signs around the lake, this area was known for large and aggressive marine life, and to them that was the most reasonable explanation. After all, why would they believe a group of trespassing teenagers? Currently, I walk with a prosthetic. I still get nightmares about what happened that night. My foot is a painful reminder every day of what happened to me and how I could have avoided it. We should never have gone in there in the first place. To this day, I still do believe that I was attacked by some sort of paranormal being, and that night will haunt me till the day I die. I'm an American citizen, but my family is from the South Asian country of Bengal. I loved spending time with my friends in the States, but I really enjoyed visiting my extended family back east. I worked at a business firm, and I handled a lot of information sciences there. It was a well-paying but tedious job. I rarely took breaks, but my manager was kind enough to let me get a couple weeks off of work every year. Those precious free weeks I had were taken up by a variety of activities. It was between going on vacation, chilling at home, or visiting my family back in Bangladesh. This year, the executives decided to give my branch a 1-week break over spring. But this break was going to be special. It had been more than 2 years since I'd last seen my greater family, and I really missed them. I instantly booked a ticket to Dhaka International Airport, packed my bags, and was en route the next day. When I arrived to the capital city, I swung by some old friends and we hung out a little. My old friends lived in the heart of the capital, but my family, on the other hand, well, they were in a not-so-urban area. While my parents moved to the large city when I was rather young, my grandparents, uncles, and aunts stayed in a small town northwest of the capital. The town was rural, but it was beautiful. It had a population of about 15,000 at the time, and it was a sparsely populated area. The town comprised of a set of homes, a school, a few shops, and mostly forest between them. It was a very remote region, and it didn't have all the facilities someone from a developed nation would consider normal. The electricity was unreliable, the tap water wasn't clean, and the internet cut out most often. But in my eyes, the lack of comfort was worth it. People were very nice and the community was tightly knit. I could consider almost anyone there family. So I hopped on a bus and headed over there. It was a long and bumpy ride, but I got there in one piece. After years, I was finally reunited with my family. The village was just as beautiful as it was. At the door, I was greeted by my sister, my cousin Babel, my family dog, my mother, and my Aunt Tara. She happened to be visiting from a neighboring village. Now don't get me wrong, I love my family and it's always a blast seeing them. But my Aunt Tara was a bit odd, we'll say. Aunt Tara was a strong believer in superstitions and spiritual things. The things she'd say or try to make us do were extremely bizarre sometimes. She was seemingly a nice person, but was difficult to spend time with. She had a few quirks, if I can put it shortly. She would always tell us these terrifying ghost stories when we were kids, but most of the time, they weren't even for fun. She was serious. After catching up with my family, we quickly stepped inside and I unpacked my bags. But as I was unpacking, I felt a pair of eyes on me. It was my aunt. Sure, she was an oddball, but this was weird even for her. "Are you okay, Auntie?" I asked. She kept staring for a bit longer, but snapped out of it. "I'm fine," she said. "But the presence around us isn't," she continued. I was taken aback. I honestly thought she was done with this spiritual nonsense. "I sense a disturbance in the spirits among us. There are malicious souls and I sense them nearby," she continued. Okay, Auntie, I'll bear that in mind," I replied, trying to make the conversation a bit less awkward. "Be careful, and don't go out at night. Find a nearby shrine if you feel watched." She abruptly walked away. At this point, I was more annoyed than scared. I was honestly reluctant to even stay the night if she continued these antics. My thought was interrupted by my mom calling us out for dinner. Her food was delicious, so naturally I rushed over to the dining room. But as we were eating, my aunt was still acting strange. She had a sort of pendant necklace with a holy symbol on it. Every time we tried to include her in the conversation or asked her anything, she'd passively change the topic. She seemed very suspicious of something. We eventually just ignored her behavior and continued with our nights. But as I was about to sleep, my aunt knocked on my door. She told me once again to not step out at night, and that she was very worried for our safety. I couldn't believe it. She's still droning on about these spirits. I just shut the door and ignored her. I tried my best to go to sleep, but my jet lag was keeping me up. Bangladesh was about 13 hours ahead of the US West Coast, and my body clock was completely flipped. I tried watching some videos on my phone in hopes of passing time, but the internet eventually cut out, and it was just me alone in a dark room. I thought about going out on a night walk, but then remembered what my aunt said. I didn't believe in that stuff, but part of me was telling me that it may actually be a bad idea going out at this hour. But my boredom was getting to me, and I said hell with it. My dog awoke to the sound of me stepping outside and started acting up. At first I thought he was just cranky and tired, but he seemed to growl at me as I got closer to the door. That was odd. I ventured out anyways. As I stepped out, I felt the crisp air hit my skin. The village didn't have many streetlights, and it was all engulfed in forest. There was a trail over to the side of the street my house was on, and I proceeded through there. At first, nothing unusual seemed to be occurring. The sound of the crickets roared as I walked through the wilderness on a dirt path. But as I was walking, I felt watched. I tried to shrug it off as my aunt getting to me, but I almost felt a chill going up my spine. I kept hearing a loud voice coming from a distance behind me. It seemed to be an owl. But as the hooting of the owl got closer and closer, there seemed to be something seriously wrong with it. The owl hoots were almost human. The sounds the owl made kept switching back and forth from an actual owl to what seemed to be a person impersonating one. The hooting got louder and louder, but I never noticed an owl in sight. I surveyed my surroundings and saw a misty black figure in the shadows. It quickly vanished behind a tree. I kept scanning up and down the trees to find out what was around me, and I noticed a silhouette of an owl in a tree, but as I blinked, it disappeared again. What was happening? Was it my eyes still adjusting to the dark? Maybe my jet lag was getting to me. The hooting suddenly stopped, and the forest was dead silent. My breath sounded like a roar. I slowly looked over my shoulder only to see it. In the darkness, I made out an owl sitting in a tree. The owl somehow morphed itself into a shadowy humanoid ghost form. I couldn't believe my eyes. I didn't want to believe my eyes. The misty creature slowly morphed around and started shifting from tree to tree, getting closer to me. At this point, I sprinted. I sprinted as hard as I could, adrenaline rushing through every ounce of my body. I heard the hooting start again behind me, this time like it was angry. I kept sprinting out of the woods. I ran. I looked towards my parents' house. I couldn't think of anywhere else I could hide. When I got to my house, before I could even say anything, my aunt was waiting by the front door. She dragged me in. The creature was still following me. I could hear voices at the edge of the forest where my house was. My aunt quickly took me over to our house's shrine and kept me there between a few idols. I waited and waited, confused and terrified. Eventually, the sun rose. I somehow mustered the strength to step out of the prayer room. My aunt was waiting outside the door. I explained to her everything that happened. The owl, the noises, the weird misty figure, and how it somehow chased me home. She explained to me that I was very lucky to be alive, and that I'd encountered something called a penchapechi. Penchapechis are a form of unsatisfied or malicious spirits that haunt the forests of Bengal. They take the form of owls and follow travelers in the woods until they're alone and cornered. The ghost would then consume its prey like a zombie and continue to its next victim. She said that she felt the presence of many angry or ill-intended spirits in the area. She felt a rise in these ghosts were most likely due to the flood in a neighboring region that killed many people. The spirits of those people did not feel satisfied with their lives. Most of them died far too young and continued to live in the afterlife as ghosts. That story occurred about a year back, and I haven't gone back since. But if I do, I will definitely listen to my aunt.
All of this started happening maybe about a year ago. I remember that it was really warm outside. For reference, I'm a female, and me and my husband, who we'll call Jay, have 3 kids at home. L, who was 13 at the time, H, who was 12, and G, who was 8. It was during the evening time, and it was pretty dark outside, so it must have been pretty close to 9 p.m. I was just sitting on my bed watching TV when I then heard a knock on my window that was really close to my right. The curtains on that window were open because I had a window unit running. I've always slept with those curtains open to get all the air because it's just so hot here. Jay goes directly into the backyard to check it out. The door to the backyard is in my room. It's one of those add-on rooms on smaller houses. Anyways, he goes out there, but he doesn't see anything out of the ordinary. The dog was also with him, and she didn't bark or let on that anything was off. Elle then came out of the bathroom, and she thinks that she might have heard someone knock on the bathroom window. She was covered in soap and bundled up in a towel, but we told her that we just looked and there was nothing there, so she went back to finishing her shower. No one was really that scared by this because our neighborhood is really active and people are just always outside, so we tried to reason that it was just some odd noise and then let it go. About an hour later, G had fallen asleep on the couch watching TikTok videos, H was asleep in his room, which is next to L's room, and L was in her room laying on her bed looking at her phone with her curtain open. Up to this point, L was really lax about her room's windows. I was always getting on to her for not closing her curtains and making sure that her windows were locked, and even found out that she was sleeping with her window open so that the cat had a way in and out. Jay and I were in our room watching a movie when we then heard Elle then let out the most terrifying scream I think I've ever heard in my life. It was a scream of sheer terror. Panicked, Jay and I ran to her. We meet her in the living room and she's actually so scared that she faints right there on the living room floor. Elle comes to in just a few seconds and she then tells us that someone had banged on her window and that when she looked over, she had then saw a man that was staring right at her with his hands cupped around his eyes. He didn't run when he saw her look over, he just stood there and just kept staring at her. Jay then runs to his room to get his rifle and runs out to the front yard while I get on the phone to call the cops. Jay had positioned himself right outside the house next door that had been empty for years. The neighborhood kids have been in there and they found chip bags and beer bottles before, but I've never seen anyone in there. Before the cops arrive, I take the gun inside so I didn't have to answer any uncomfortable questions. The cops search my yard, the property next door, and the alley up and down the street, but they don't find anything. They tell us to just lock the doors and call them back if something else happens. I forgot to mention that by this time all of the kids are awake and know everything now. L and G were really terrified and H was just really pissed off. H has autism and just has no real sense of danger. All he knew was that his sisters and mom were scared and his dad was pissed, so he's just standing on the porch cussing up a storm into the night, daring that sneaky bastard to show his face again and vowing to kick his ass. About 2 weeks later, the person comes back just tapping, and since then it's been a pretty regular occurrence of tapping or knocking. One time he actually pretended to be a cat trying to be let in. I saw him on our porch while G saw him peeping through the window on the front door. We've called the police like they advised us, but they've never been able to catch him. We've stayed up all night waiting in L's bedroom and never heard it. We've hidden in my shed in the backyard and my car in the front trying to catch this person outside, but nothing works. No one can catch him. My kids either sleep in the living room or our bedroom. We don't go out after dark and we don't stay home alone. I contacted the lieutenant that is over our neighborhood. He's sent officers and he's assigned a patrol for our street. Police are randomly popping up at my house to check on us and patrol. I think it's to show the people on the street that they're here and know what's going on. Whenever they come at night to visit, they always have at least 2 cars and the lights are always on in their cars. The man came back last week at 2 a.m., but Elle was just way too scared to get out of bed to wake us up. Elle is a teenager and she really likes the privacy of her room, so sometimes she sleeps in there. Since this last occurrence, Elle and G have stopped sleeping in their room, so I honestly don't know if he's been back. He's never knocked on my bedroom window since that first night. I haven't been able to buy cameras until now, and someone on Reddit actually suggested anti-climb paint, which apparently is a paint that never dries and stains whatever it touches. After posting this on Reddit and reading all of the comments and thinking about it, I think this creep lives on my street. His escape is always so quick. No matter how fast or how quickly we get outside, he's always gone. He never does it when they have friends over or when we went on vacation and my dad stayed here. He knows all of our cars and routines, and he's close enough to get away quickly. I just have no idea what to do anymore. So for a little backstory, I'm currently an 18-year-old female, about 5'7", and the youngest of 3 older brothers, an older sister, and really protective parents. Like seriously, if I never moved out on my own, I think my dad would actually be okay with that, as then he could continue to be the overbearing helicopter parent that he still is. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my dad very much, but he's pretty much the definition of a helicopter parent. If he was at all tech savvy, he'd probably put trackers in all of our phones. My mom is better, allowing us a bit more freedom, but she definitely has her overbearing moments as well. I think they're just both convinced that something terrible will happen to me if they let me out of the house past like 9 p.m. So growing up with parents like these and the stereotypical,
"If you mess with my baby sister, I'll hurt you,"
older brothers, I'm a very cautious person to say the least. The story takes place in the fall of 2017, around mid to late August. It was the time when it was beginning to get dark around 6 p.m., where precisely my mother had asked me to run up to the store to get a couple of last-minute things for dinner. She had me do this because she had forgotten to get what she was shopping for earlier in the day. I'm pretty much convinced the only reason she asked me to go around the time that it was getting dark was because she basically had no choice, and she had already began cooking and she couldn't leave. And my dad was also out of the house, which pretty much left me as her last option. Well, that and the fact that the store was literally like a 5-minute walk away. So handing me a $10 bill and making sure I had my phone on me, she sent me on my way. Growing up in the same house my entire life, I had made this walk probably 1,000 times. For some context, my house was essentially right behind the store, you could say. There's several ways to get there from my house, but I always take the quickest way, which much to my parents' satisfaction also happened to be following one of the main roads in my neighborhood. The store that I was going to was in a shopping center that didn't really have much in it, especially on the side I always came in on. Basically, my point is just that unless you lived in that direction, there was really no reason for you to be walking over there. Upon reaching the entrance of the store, I had saw an average-looking guy sitting on the bench right outside the automatic doors. He was wearing the orange shirt and brown apron that was the store's uniform, and he was smoking a cigarette. Now, I've had pretty moderate asthma since I was 4 years old, so I always do my best to steer clear of smokers. But seeing as I had to pass him to get inside the store, I just tried to keep as much distance between us as possible. As I was passing him, we had made eye contact, and he said a seemingly friendly hello to me. I offered a wave and a small smile in response, then walked through the doors. One thing that really struck me as odd was that me and my family frequented this store at least like 2 or 3 times a week, and I had not once seen this guy in there. I just did my best to brush it off though, as I grabbed a few things my mom needed, thinking that he might have just gotten hired, or maybe we just coincidentally happened to come in on the days that he doesn't work there. That thought quickly slipped my mind as I then texted my mom that I was on my way home and I left the store, being met with the now dark sky. I noticed the man still sitting outside with his cigarette now long gone, and I could only assume that he was on a break. Once again, he greeted me. This time I said a quiet hi in response. I'm naturally a really fast walker, so within about a minute or two, I was stepping out of the parking lot and onto the cracked sidewalk. It was then that I had heard footsteps coming behind me, and since I'm already pretty paranoid about these things, my heart began to beat a little faster now. We had just recently got streetlights on our street, something that we didn't have during the time this incident took place, so the only light came from the gas station across the street as well as the porch lights from the house next to me. This only added to my feelings of unease. I had stopped walking and then heard someone shout, "Hey!" from behind me. Quickly turning around, I saw that it was the guy from earlier who was smoking outside the store. He was fast walking up to me, so naturally I had took a few steps back. He noticed this, and he then said in a really calm and overly eager voice,
"Hey, I just want to talk and get to know you."
I was barely 15 years old at the time, and this dude was at least in his mid-30s. It was definitely creepy. Not even responding, I then turned and began to nearly run home, really thankful that he didn't try to follow me. Instead, he just shouted out some stuff to me that I now can't really remember, but in a really annoyed tone. As soon as I got through the front door, I told my mom what happened, and she agreed with me that it was definitely really weird and creepy. We never told my dad about it, and to this day, he still doesn't know. Thankfully, I never saw that guy again, and nothing ever came of this incident. And I'm really glad. I was an 18-year-old female when this incident occurred. I was in the first year of university. I was walking to one of my classes when I then saw a man walking towards me. There was nothing really too off-putting about his appearance. He was tall and slightly large, and he looked to be in his 40s. He was also wearing a shirt with my school's logo on it, the same shirt that the service workers wore. I noticed that he was staring at me. I stared back at him to try and make him look away, but he didn't. He continued to walk towards me and held eye contact till he passed me. I didn't really think too much of this. Over the next few months, I had saw him around campus several times, and the same thing would always happen. He would always stare at me until he walked past me, but he never once said a word. On one occasion, I had saw him in the basement of my building while I was doing laundry. Once again, he walked past me without saying anything. Although he really made me feel a bit uneasy, I didn't let it bother me too much, and just kind of assumed that maybe he just had something off about him. This continued for a couple of months before anything disturbing happened. On one night, my roommate was asleep and I needed to clear my head, so I slipped on my shoes and coat and then headed out for a smoke. Now, my university's campus was smoke-free, so I walked around to the back of my building and then lit a cigarette. I had heard some rustling coming from further away, still around the building but kind of in a spot where I couldn't see it. I didn't get too worried though, as the back of my building faced the woods and we're kind of used to seeing deer and other small animals around the campus. Still though, I was really curious. I quietly walked over and looked around the corner. I was surprised to see a man standing there looking right up at my building. I started to squint my eyes and that's when I realized that it was the same man who was always staring at me. What was he doing? His hands were in his pockets and he seemed to just be staring right up at the windows. I felt a little uneasy as that's when I realized that he was staring at the general area of my own window, but I couldn't tell for sure what he was looking at. I didn't want him to see me, so I quietly finished my cigarette and flicked it onto the ground. I crushed the cigarette into the ground with my shoe and then headed back to my room. I had then took a really quick shower and slipped on some PJs. I tried to fall asleep that night, but I just couldn't get that man out of my head. Why was he just staring at the building? Was he really looking into my window? After a few minutes of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided that my questions really needed answers. So I quietly got up and tiptoed across my room to the window. I looked out the window, and sure enough, the man was staring at me. When he noticed me staring back, I honestly expected him to walk away. But he didn't. He just continued to stare at me. I started to feel kind of sick at this point. Should I call someone? I mean, I guess he wasn't technically doing anything wrong, so I decided I would just leave it. He couldn't do anything to harm me. My door was always kept locked, and there was no way he could fit through my window. It was on the 3rd floor, and it was extremely tiny. I crawled back into bed and went to sleep. About 2 months had passed since this incident, and I hadn't seen the man since. I was hoping that maybe he had quit or maybe he had been fired, but I wasn't so lucky. One day I came back from class to then find my roommate standing in the lobby of my building, and she had 2 police officers standing with her. When she saw me, she had then grasped and ran right towards me, then hugging me. She was visibly really shaken and she seemed really scared about something. I asked her what was going on, and before she could even answer me, a police officer then approached me. He then asked me to confirm my name and room number. I told him, and he then showed me a picture of the man. It was the same exact man that had been standing out my building 2 months prior. I said that I recognized him, and I told them everything that happened from the start of the year. The police officer sat me down, and he then told me what happened. Apparently, the man had been sneaking into our room like multiple times throughout the year. The man had both mine and my roommate's schedule so that he could see when we would be in and out of the room. He also had placed micro cameras in the corners of the room. My roommate wasn't feeling well, so when she had left one of her classes early one day, she had returned to the room to find the man standing in it. She then freaked out and called the campus police. The police then searched his office and they found that he had stolen multiple things from my room. Things like my underwear, and he even stole my garbage. It was really weird. He also had like dozens of pictures of me, and some even taken around campus, and some extremely zoomed in on me in my room. The man also had a spare key to our room, which he would use to get in and out of it. The man was obviously fired from his job. I'm not exactly sure what kind of legal action was taken, but the police assured me that I'd never see him again. I've always really wondered what his true intentions were, and what would have happened if my roommate hadn't caught him that day. I guess it's a good thing I never found out. A few years back, I was a few box pharmacy and convenience store. It was right across my backyard, and I could probably sprint there in under a minute if I really wanted to, so it really worked out for me. I was in my late 30s. I worked out quite a lot, and while I was fit, I was still a smaller girl. Even though I was married, I would constantly get hit on and asked out. It was pretty flattering, but it always made me feel really awkward. Now, this particular store I worked at was in a really weird part of town. It was on the right side of town to attract the Karens, but close enough to the not-so-good side of town to attract the drug addicts, drunks, and psychopaths. Anyway, let me say that I'm not someone that gets scared easily. I've had someone high on meth crash their car into the side of the store, causing the back of our store to bend inward because we didn't carry pineapple juice. I had a man pick me up and throw me over his shoulder and start walking out the door with me, saying that I'd make a good wife. Yeah, that's one for another time. Anyways, it all started on a Sunday morning. I remember this because I was really busy building end caps and making sell signs. I was working with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by and I was really bubbly this day. There was a man and his son that came into the store and they made a beeline for me. The man was probably just a little under 6 foot, and he was skinny. The man had dreadlocks and a long skinny silver earring dangling from his ear. He also had this really tan trench coat that I found really odd because it was summer. Nonetheless though, I had then greeted them and asked if they needed some help. The man spoke with a really thick Jamaican accent, and he said that his GPS stopped working, and he wanted to see if we had any. I let out a really small laugh, thinking he was messing with me. No, that would be at Best Buy or something, but we do have a small section of electronics on this wall over here. I indicated the wall to the back of me.
Oh, thanks,
He said, taking a look but also keeping his eyes on me. Something about those eyes just really chilled me. He was speaking another language to his son, but I kept going on about my task for the day, and he would call me to help him, asking me questions about chargers and SD cards. I answered them, and then he started telling me how beautiful I was. Really awkwardly, I had thanked him.
You must work out, yeah?
He asked. Yeah, yoga mostly. Yeah, yoga more and more uncomfortable now. He made some more comments about my body, telling me how he loved my tattoos, and he was just really being a creep. I tried to stay polite though, and eventually I just walked away to do some more work. I started to avoid him, but he was still staring at me. The man had his phone out, and I kept hearing the shuddering of a camera. I went to the office to tell my other coworker that I thought the guy was taking my picture, and I was just really feeling uncomfortable. He then came out and watched over me. Shortly after my coworker came out, the man and his son then left. By the time the end of my shift came, I forgot about him. A few weeks later, I was up front ringing customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy that day, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker then handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked her. I don't know, some man in dreadlocks told me to give it to you, she said. I took the envelope and I went into my office with it. Inside of the envelope were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. My heart sank. I had no idea that these were taken. Most of them were of me in the store while working, some of me walking home, and some even with me and my daughter. I felt sick. There was also a note with it. It said something along the lines of,
You're so beautiful. I'm in love with you. I'd be a much better husband than what you have now. Please give me a chance.
There was more to it, but it's in police evidence now. The guy really stupidly left his name and address. I then called our store manager as well as the police. They took our camera footage, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They told him that he really needed to stay away from me or the next time he's getting arrested and he's banned from the store. I was really relieved, but still really bothered by it. A few more weeks to about a month then went by. It was another really busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty, and we had another coworker as my cashier. We were ringing things up together when I noticed a man staring at me. The man was tall with a medium build. The man was tall with a medium. He had the same earring and long trench coat as the other man did. This man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and really dead and angry. It felt like they were staring right through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase, just stood and stared. I tried to smile politely at him, then another wave of customers came. I got lost in helping everyone, but didn't see the man anymore. Even when things calmed down, I still didn't see him. I decided to go start facing the back of the store, and I told my coworker to call me if she needed me. As I was back there, I heard that Jamaican accent and all over. I looked up at the mirror to see that same scary man on the phone.
Yeah, she's here. No, it's just one other girl here with her. I can grab her when she leaves. No problem.
I was absolutely horrified. He didn't see me, so I slowly made my way up to the front. I briefly tell my coworker what's going on and then called the police and store manager. The cops took him away. A few days later, a detective came to speak to me. The two men were brothers. They were abducting women and actually using them for human trafficking. He told me I was really lucky. I later found out that they had apparently found a woman beaten to death in their apartment. They've both since gone to prison. This still gives me really bad nightmares. What happened to that woman could have easily been me, but thank God it wasn't.
This is a true story that happened several years back when I was 13. This was a time when I was growing up in New York. We actually had a summer house on Cape Cod and spent every other weekend there, if we could. Cape Cod is a peninsula off the east coast of Massachusetts. It becomes very busy, even crowded during the summertime, but during the winter season it becomes empty. The majority of houses in our area are owned as summer houses, so during the winter, the houses are still there but the people are not there. In contrast to New York, there are only street lamps on the single main road in this town. The main road goes from the town center to the beach. Aside from this road, all the others are dark and very black at night. Also, Cape Cod extends out into the Atlantic from the mainland, forming a bay, Cape Cod Bay. Not only can one watch the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean, but they can also watch the sunset over Cape Cod Bay on any given clear day. Another effect of being surrounded by ocean is that there is very little man-made light at night. The stars are so clear that the Milky Way is clearly visible spanning across the sky on clear nights. This story happened during the vacation period between Christmas and the New Year. The Christmas celebrations were finished. There were plenty of leftover turkey and pumpkin pie. We got a bit of cabin fever with all the Christmas food and family on one evening. My older sister, who is 7 years older than I, 20 at the time, came up with an idea to take a walk to the harbor, which was about a 20-minute walk from our house. The harbor can be fun because we can walk out onto the docks and walk among the boats. While I was a bit creeped out to walk around a deserted beach town on a cold winter night, I also thought it would be fun to get out of the house and maybe even a bit exciting. We headed out. Across the street from our classic Cape Cod cottage is a field with a forest at the other end. At nighttime, I would also have a little fear that there would be a psycho watching from the tall grass. Perhaps he would have an axe. But while it kept my nerves wary, I knew it was my imagination. But still, icy wind blowing on tall grass is a perfect setting for some horrors. Add to this a moonless sky with a million sparkling stars and the Milky Way above, and the horror setting is at level with Stephen King. We walked out into the main road, went a bit down the road, and then turned to walk down a side street that leads to the street that dips downhill toward the harbor. This side street runs along the backside of a long hotel. It's more like a 2-level motel, painted light yellow, that has a pool. It is well situated in town, so it can be full of life during the summer. On this December evening, the hotel was closed for the season, completely dark, and several windows are covered with plywood for protection. My sister mentioned that a hotel that spans an entire block but is partially boarded reminds her of a horror movie, like one of these slasher films where the characters make all the wrong decisions and walk in the worst of dark places just to find their worst nightmare come true. At the end of the street with the hotel, we continue to the left, which is a long road downhill through the woods to the harbor. This isn't a pure forest because there are houses set back from the road with an occasional driveway. Many of the driveways have reflectors on a rock, a fence, or just standing on a metal stick. These reflectors reflect back the headlights from cars. I mention this because we could not see any of them or anything. It was pitch black in the wooded area and the road seemed to continue into the black. Come to think of it, we had not seen a single car or a single person or a single sign of life since we left our house. My nerves were on edge. I was only 13 at the time, and although my nerves were screaming, I tried to stay calm because I wanted to seem tough to my sister. The woods alongside the road were particularly nerve-wracking. The trees come right up to the asphalt on each side of the road. They provide many opportunities to hide someone or something. The houses beyond the woods were dark because rarely did vacationers come here in winter. I started to notice that my sister was also starting to lose her nerves, and that's when I felt it. I felt a flush of energy move up the back of my neck. It makes it feel like the hairs are sticking out on end. This is a feeling I get when I'm being watched. It's hard to describe this feeling, but I still get it today. Sometimes when someone is looking at me from behind, it's either some kind of sixth sense or it's just my imagination working with my intuition. We were now midway into the wooded area, down the hill towards the harbor. I was sort of starting to lose it and was just about to stop pretending not to be freaked out and tell my sister, let's go back, when she suggested it. She said, "It's late. Maybe we don't have to go all the way to the harbor." I replied back, "Yeah, plus it's kind of creepy and dark down there." The back of my neck was shivering and I felt my body shudder as it wrestled between acting relaxed and flipping the switch to fight or flight mode. My sister replied, "Yeah, pretty creepy. Come on, let's go back to the house and we can see the harbor tomorrow." We turned around and she grabbed my hand and we started walking fast back up the hill. I remember that she held my hand so tight it hurt, and my sister never holds my hand. I can't think of another time she did this. And this is where the story takes a deep dive down the rabbit hole. As we got towards the end of the wooded area, my sister screamed out, "I've got a knife and I'm not afraid to use it." And she did not lose any rhythm of her fast walk while saying this. We crossed the street and headed onto the street with the backside of the closed 2-level motel. My sister continues speed walking and looks back. She let out a little panic noise and looked back again. She then commanded me to not look back. I was utterly freaking out at this point. Aside from the eerie vibe of the dark, empty street and my own inner panic, I had not actually seen anything out of the ordinary, with the exception of my sister's completely and now suddenly insane behavior. Then she said, "When I say run, you run, okay?" "Okay." We were almost at the main road, a block from our street, and she screams, "Run." We book it. She let go of my hand and both broke into the best sprint we could do. I could hear our footsteps banging the asphalt and could also hear several other steps banging in the distance. We cut across the grass area to a shortcut towards our street and ran through the front yards of our neighbor's house to make a beeline for the front door of our house. We made it. We both ran in and locked the storm door, which is mostly glass. I was panicking, but not sure if there was anything or if we were just going crazy. It was a strange transition from outside, which was terrifying, to inside the warm lit house, which seemed safe. I was questioning what happened in my mind. I could sense that my sister was also questioning herself whether there even was a threat, or we both just lost our minds out there. I asked my sister what she saw, and she said that there was a man that was standing at the edge of one of the driveways. We walked right by him on the way back. She said that when we were behind the hotel, he crossed the street and was following us for a while. She said he was looking right at us, and although we were walking very fast, he was gaining on us. She explained that it doesn't make sense that a man would be standing out there in that dark, wooded area. Honestly, I really don't understand what happened that night, and I'm not sure how much of what my sister said is true, if she was seeing things or not. But one thing is for sure, I realized that I prefer walking to that harbor during the daylight.